We now have a quorum. I expect that we will have some additional members joining us shortly, but in the deference of the folks who are down here, we have a packed agenda today. So we'll go ahead and get started before everyone gets here. Mr. Clerk, if you could, we'll call the meeting to order. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy.
Here.
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Coder.
Here.
Alderman Ogilvie. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Oldenburg.
Here.
Chairman Rhodey.
Present.
President Reed. You have 5 present, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. First off, I want to announce that we have a packed agenda today. As I believe most people are aware, we're in the midst of trying to change the way that we do incentives. And so we've been having a number of meetings on that to give everyone a little history. We started on this a couple years ago. We had an incentive study done. We hired a financial analyst. We developed a financial model. And we're trying to standardize our approach to these things. Our challenge is that SLDC will visit with a developer, or an alderman will visit with the developer at the beginning of the process. They may work a year or so, then they come before the board, and we end up with all kinds of people with their own ideas. What projects should be incentivized is very subjective, and we end up with a lot of discussion down here that I feel can create uncertainty at the beginning of the process. So our challenge is to provide better guidance to the staff over at SLDC and the aldermen on what projects will get incentives and what projects don't. If you kind of think about incentives, the government used taxes and tax breaks in a whole bunch of ways to encourage and discourage certain behaviors. And take, for example, the home mortgage deduction. The government creates that, and the Congress does not vote on every person who uses a home mortgage deduction. And so they create guidelines on how much you can deduct, how large the loan can be, and so forth. And I think it's incumbent upon us to try to begin creating guidelines on for our staff, knowing that we're not all going to agree on it, but if we can go ahead and create some sort of standardized guidelines. Well, we're on our way to doing that, and we're having trouble coming to that agreement. We kind of put it on hold last year, and then the chair of the Neighborhood Development Committee recently has said that he's holding off on passing any additional incentives until we get that kind of clarified. So our committee, in support of him, will not be passing any bills out of committee. I apologize for any inconvenience. We will be working very, very hard, and I think SLDC is getting very serious about this. As soon as we get agreement with them, we will hold the meeting ASAP. So what I am trying to tell you is that if you are down here for one of the bills that are seeking any economic incentives or abatement or anything like that, we will hear that later today, particularly because it was publicized. Those that were publicized, with some advance warning, we want to go ahead, and for technical legal reasons, we want to go ahead and have the hearing today, but we will hold those in committee, and then we will schedule a committee to vote those out absolutely as soon as we can get this agreement reached. So if any of the older people down here or anyone else is down here, that will probably be the last thing on the schedule. So that's going to be fairly late in the meeting. If you need to leave, let us know. We'll make sure that we conduct a hearing on your behalf. We'll document that we had the hearing and so forth, but we will not vote those out of committee today. So, let us know if today's goes on too long. Our agenda is fairly packed. We have Ms. Angie Banks, the CFO of the St. Louis school system, is with us today to give us an update. She was here last year. We're trying to make that an annual event. We have some appointments to the Board of Adjustment that we had requested that our committee provide an opportunity to meet with those folks and recommend them to the full board. And then we have a presentation from the Federal Reserve. Those will be the first 3 items on the agenda, and then we'll get to the resolutions and the board bills after that. To kind of put this in context for everybody, our committee, as we began this year, kind of adopted a mission or a purpose statement, and our goal was to go ahead and work. We are the HUD's committee, Housing, Urban Development, and Zoning. I'm sorry, we are the HUD's committee, Housing, Urban Development, and Zoning, and we want to really focus on urban development. For us, that means doing economic development in a way that protects the economic viability of the city. In other words, we wanted to grow the tax base. We've talked about that in committee, how historically in the last several decades, the only way we've increased revenue is tax rate. So we want to go ahead and figure out ways of growing the tax rate. And of course, we're doing that for the purpose of trying to improve the well-being of our residents. And we want to start understanding how to measure those, create some metrics for that. So obviously an important component of the well-being of our residents is having a viable public education system, which is the reason that we have the CFO of the public school here. We do not set policy, but we go ahead and obviously our economic development policies impact the amount of revenue available for that. And then we're going to have the Federal Reserve, who is perhaps the preeminent statistical keeper of federal statistics of, out there. And so we're going to have a presentation from them as well today. So that's why we're going a little long. But to begin, why don't we go ahead and, Ms. Banks, if you could, thank you very much for coming back again today and kind of sharing with us how you're doing.
Good morning and thank you. My name is Angie Banks. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the St. Louis Public Schools. And I was here last year, so I just want to thank Chairman Rohde for inviting me back again. I've been working a lot with Dr. Hollins. I want to thank him for he's been extremely helpful. So today, I really just wanted to give you a brief update. You have the presentations. I'm not going to go through all of the financials. Certainly, if there are questions that you have, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. But we'll just get started here. So really just want to give you a few updates on the district's transformation plan and just go over a few key metrics and respond to any questions you might have. So the district is really, the basic tenets that we are run by is based on our transformation plan, and it's been updated several times. We're now on Transformation Plan 3.0, and you can see the major goals that we have under the Transformation Plan 3. Creating a system of excellent schools, cultivating culturally responsive school leaders, teachers, and support personnel. All students learn to lead and succeed. Obviously, we don't just want to graduate students, but we want them to be productive citizens. Community partnerships and resources support the district, and we're certainly appreciative of the partnership that we have with the City of St. Louis. And the district advances fairness and equity across the system. So these are the things that we're really working on. We've made a lot of strides in the last several years, but we know that we still have a ways to go, and we're certainly working in that direction. Okay. So the school finance report is basically a snapshot of how we've been doing over the last several years in the areas that you see before you. All this data is based on audited financials and is available at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. So all the data in this presentation is really pulled from DESE. So it's not district. I didn't just come up with this data, but it is information that is audited, and it's available for all 580 districts in the state of Missouri. So if you look at 2017, what you'll note is that our enrollment has declined over the last several years. I mean, we used to have over 100,000 students in our district, and now we're down to if we're talking K to 12, less than 21,000 students for the current year. This is data from 2017, and enrollment really drives a lot of our revenue. So it's important that we try to increase our student enrollment. You can also see, if you go back one slide, please, slide 4, I believe. Yeah, thank you. Again, I'm not going to go through all of this data, but I just wanted to really point out in 2017, if you look at the tax rate, the 4.7, that is the first year that the Proposition 1 passed, so we had big increases in tax revenue due to the voters approving a tax rate increase. You'll see in red, again, I think I went through this last year, that our local revenue is really overstated just because of the way that the state allocates funds to the charter schools. So the district receives all of the tax revenue, and then the state will provide the charter schools portion of the tax revenue through the state formula. Again, here is just a picture of our enrollment over the last couple years, the district versus the charter schools. So obviously we've been declining while the charter schools are increasing, and this has been pretty consistent over the last 15 years. So this district financial information, last year we really looked at how the district was doing as compared to comparison districts, and these are districts that are in the St. Louis area, so that you can really see how, with some of the major statistics, how the district compares to other nearby districts. Now, we don't necessarily think that we compare, I don't know if we would necessarily compare ourselves to Clayton or district. We don't have the same type of demographics, but people are always interested to see how we compare to some of these districts. One of the things that is really kind of telling, if you look at the first column, the percent local, and that local revenue is really primarily the tax revenue. And when you see the percentage of local revenue that the districts receive, the higher the percentage of local revenue is really an indicator of affluence. And you'll notice that the Clayton, Ladou's, Parkwood, how they have a very high percentage of local revenue, and then notice at the bottom, it's the Riverview, Jennings, Normandy. So that really is an indication of affluence. St. Louis City, our district, is kind of in the middle of the pack, but again, our local revenue is really overstated, as I mentioned, because of the charter schools. And also another piece of information that a lot of people don't understand is that the district, what's different about the district is that our revenue covers all of our special education students, whereas the county districts, SSD or special school district, their revenues cover the special education costs for the individual county districts.
Ms. Banks, let me ask you a question real quick.
Yes.
What is ADA?
That's the average daily attendance.
Okay.
It's very similar to enrollment.
Okay,
It's a
thank you.
form of enrollment.
Chairman,
Okay.
could I ask a quick, could you, Ms. Banks, you were just
Yes.
talking, the point you just covered about the special school districts.
Yes.
Could you break that down a little bit? So this special school district, which is obviously the line item on it, it's a very expensive program for good reason. Does that not include the city? Do we have, we handle those students with special needs separately than the special school district?
St. Louis Public Schools pays for our own special education costs, so it's not covered by SSD. However, based on agreements from long ago, we know that we have a lot of transfer students, VIC students that go to county districts. The district is still paying SSD for some of what we call the excess special education costs for city students that are attending county districts. So this is just another example of comparison districts. The local tax effort per ADA are very similar local tax effort per student. So if you can see over the years, 2012 through 2017, really how much revenue that the districts have per student. For the district in 2017, about $7,300 of local revenue per student. And again, you can see the more affluent districts, how much they have per student. Clayton, over $17,000. So clearly this has an impact on resources, and I'll talk a little bit later about how we can compensate our teachers, the programming, the technology, and just the opportunities that are available to our students versus other districts. This slide really gives an indication of how the district compares to the state average as far as teacher compensation. You'll notice that beginning in 2014, how the average Missouri teacher salary has increased from 2014 to 2017, whereas in the district, we've been declining, and we finally took a rise in 2017, and that's primarily due to the Proposition 1 revenue that we received. Another interesting fact is that the average tenure or experience of Missouri teachers is much longer than it is for the district. 12 years versus 9 years. So obviously that also has an impact on that average salary. But that's one of the things that we struggle with is teacher turnover. We lose a lot of teachers to surrounding districts that have higher pay. A lot of teachers will, although they are committed, obviously they have families that they need to support. So unfortunately our turnover is higher. We're always working to combat that.
Ms. Banks?
Yes.
What is the starting salary for a teacher in St. Louis Public Schools?
Starting salary for a teacher right out of school is about $39,000.
39?
Yes.
And that's based on a 9-month or?
That's based on a 10-month schedule, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You can see on this slide kind of the average teacher and administrator salaries for the comparison districts. Again, these are averages for all of our teachers. The $39,000 is for a brand new teacher, but based on, and this is based on 2017 data, the average salary for our teachers was a little under $47,000. And you can see how that compares to some of the other districts. Also, you can see the percent of the teachers that have a master's degree. We have a fantastic program with the Parsons Blewett Memorial Fund that offers professional development where all certificated staff can receive additional training, go back to school for their master's or their doctoral degrees. they have up to $30,000 lifetime to use, and unfortunately, we lose a lot of teachers after they take advantage of that program. So this last slide here is really just based on how well a district is doing, how much money do we have in the bank, if you will. It's really a measure of financial stability. You can see on the bottom line, we're in red, and how we have been increasing our fund balance or checkbook over the years. And we anticipate that at the conclusion of this year, we will again increase our fund balance. You have to have at least 3% fund balance for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to consider you financially viable. Once you dip below that, there are all kinds of different requirements that you have to do in order to help get yourself out of that place. But obviously, we're doing much better now that we have additional funds from Proposition 1, and we feel like we're in a good place, a much better place. But still, obviously, there are many challenges. We still need to work on increasing the compensation for our teachers and our support staff, and that's what we will be looking to work on in the coming years. So again, this was just a brief update. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have at this time.
I'm going to make a couple quick comments, and we'll run through the committee. I just was kind of a little surprised. I was, your assessed valuation on page 4 is virtually, I'm sorry, your assessed valuation on page 4 from 2013 to 2017 is virtually flat. And I guess I was under the impression that we were actually growing our assessed value somewhat. You know, in some of the other reports that we'd received from the assessor's office, so I was kind of surprised to see. I'm sorry, I was just talking about on page 4. I was surprised to see that the assessed valuation was virtually flat for the last 4 or 5 years, and I was obviously that has a big impact on you, and I think that was contrary to what I understood from the assessor's office. So I was just wondering if you've checked with where you get that number from, or.
Well, this information actually comes directly from the city. It comes from the assessor's office.
Okay.
That is, provided to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Now, when we calculate the tax rates that are used, although sometimes it looks like the assessed valuations are flat just based on the formulas that are used, we may be allowed additional compensation. For example, for new construction and improvements, we receive revenue associated with that each and every year. So that's something that clearly, and I believe those are TIF and tax abatements that have come off the rolls. Mm-hmm. So we'll receive that revenue. So it's a pretty complex formula that's used to actually set the rates that will generate the revenue.
The other quick question I had for you, and I think I know the answer to it, the rate in 2017, your tax rate obviously went up pretty substantially. Your local revenue per student went up very modestly, just 2.5%, maybe to 2.5%. I guess most of that revenue just went into reserves. It looked like you had a big pop in reserves.
Yes,
is that right?
That's correct.
Now that you got that covered, we would expect that in future years we might be able to see a little larger. Last year you were in here, I was thinking I think we agreed the number that we as a committee might focus on would be the expenditure, local effort per ADA or student.
Right. Now, one of the things that we will notice next year, and it's all based on how the DESE formulas work, the charter schools will actually start receiving their proration of the Prop 1 revenue next fiscal year. So they have not received any in the first 2 years, just based on the formula. So there will be, you'll almost see a correction based on that next year.
Okay. Well, I know there's a lot of questions here. We actually have several former teachers that were here. I don't know if they left. I know that, oh, they're there. One of them's over there still. I know they have questions as well, and they're not on the committee. But let's go through the committee real quick, and then we have a couple other guests, Alder people as well. Alderman Kennedy, do you have any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Alderman Boyd, do you have any questions?
Yeah, Ms. Banks, on the local, can you break down all the different buckets that you receive money in? Because it'd be interesting to me to see, if there was an increase in real estate because tax abatement and tips came off, if there an increase because of sales tax and so on and so forth. Because there's about 2 or 3 buckets of the local tax you get, right?
Well, I mean, there's several different buckets, if you will. So I'm not sure if you're talking about like real estate, personal property.
Right.
There's surtax.
Could you provide that information?
Yes.
You can just email it to the chairman.
I absolutely
and get it
can.
back to us.
Yes.
I'd
Yes, I
appreciate
will
it.
do that.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderwoman Davis.
No questions?
Alderman Kotar. No questions. Alderman Ogilvy.
Sure, real quick. In the expenditures per student, I apologize, I came in a little late, so I don't know if this was covered at all, but the expenditure per student, it looks high for the city, but that's because in the county, special school district is taking care of that population of students while that's incorporated into the full population in the city. Do we know on a apples to apples basis what the per student expenditure is in the city compared to the county, or compared to these other school districts in the county?
So you mean if we were to allocate out the special education costs to each district, or?
Well, no, if we were to take our special education costs and, take that layer of the cake
Okay.
and take it off, and then just look at the, the rest of the local student
Sure.
population and the expenditures there.
I don't have that with me. I could probably come up with that and provide that, though.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the other question, so after the Proposition 1 property tax increase, we saw, it looks like we're seeing a small bump in the average teacher salary
Yes.
within the district. Should we expect that to continue to increase in the coming years, because that rate increase was focused on teacher salary and retention, I think?
I certainly would expect so. The district and Local 420 had negotiated increases through, I believe, 2020. I know that the board is looking at potentially doing something else. So until something else is announced, we already know what the increases are through 2020, so.
Okay. But we should expect that to continue to climb that it's at 47,000 something. We should see that increase the next couple of years.
Well, the only thing I can say on that is that will also depend on the turnover. If we're having higher paid teachers leaving the district and being replaced with newer teachers, that
Right.
number is not going to change very much.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Always dealing with logistics up here. Alderman Bosley, Alderwoman Boyd, did you have any questions?
No.
Alderman Bosley, any questions?
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here. Just as a question I've always kind of had, as far as it's talking like current expenditures per child, right?
Yes.
Can you tell me what exactly that entails as far as, are we talking just to educate them? Because a lot of schools in my ward don't have certain books, or their books are falling apart, or the gym hasn't been painted since the 1990s, or the rims are, so just, when we talk about expenditures per child, I just would like to know, because parents ask me questions, so it's good to know what they're paying for, and I can articulate to them, in a way that they can understand, so I have understanding.
Well, that current expenditures actually includes all instruction and support costs, less any capital or anything that would be like a capital expenditure. So that's really not included in that cost. And it also does not include like food service related costs. That's kind of done separately. But I mean, I can certainly appreciate the concern that parents might have. I mean, we certainly receive all types of requests, either at board meetings or directly from principals and others. So I know that there's a capital plan, and certainly there's a certain budget for that. So duly noted.
Right. Thank you. Is there a, I guess, a plan, and I guess that's on kind of the city in general, but it's good to know if you all are even having those conversations about how to increase the funding that we bring in to be able to do more for the schools, because we do have a lot of children leaving the St. Louis public schools, and from the looks of it, it looks like it's about the enrollment in 2018 for charter schools is increasing, pretty heavily from what it looks like. So is there anything that we're looking at to see what we can do to compete with that, or?
Yes, we certainly have a team that works on that specifically. Can't think of what they're called right now, but it's part of our public information team, where we have recruiters that go out really door-to-door knocking, go to various events in the neighborhoods to try to recruit. Certainly, we're not anti-charter. I mean, we're pro-SLPS, but we're pro-kids in general. But obviously, we want all kids to have a better education in the city of St. Louis. We'd like them to do it with us. But yes, we do have programs to try to increase our enrollment, in addition to just kind of like your standard advertising and radio ads. We now have more boots on the ground making contact with families.
Understood. Thank you. So I have another question. I guess at what point, how do you all decide which schools that you're going to close down? Because one of the schools in my ward was going to be closed down last year, which is Clay School, and people kind of, we got it together. But the question is, how do you all choose which ones throughout the year are the ones that are less impactful, more impactful, the ones that you can do away with and send kids to another area? How do you weigh those options?
Yeah, we know it's difficult whenever there's a closure. There is a kind of a formula that we use to look at the utilization of the building, what's the capacity versus the utilization. We also look at things such as, have we put a lot of bond money into upgrading a building? So there are a number of different factors that we look at to see if they're meeting certain criteria before they, kind of fall into that risk area. And over the last several years, there's been more of a committee that we've actually worked with the schools and the communities to make sure that it's, not a big surprise, that we're getting as much input as we can, and really hopefully have an opportunity to preserve as many schools as we can. But it's very expensive for the district to maintain so many buildings, especially with very low enrollment and utilization.
So would you think one of the things we probably should be focusing on is putting more money into recruitment?
Well, we definitely need more students, so yes, and we're doing that.
How much do you think we spend on recruitment? Or would you say per year?
I don't know that it's all recruitment, but we certainly have a department that is over recruitment and advertising, and I would say that their budget is probably in the $300,000 to $350,000 range at this point.
Where do we advertise at? I mean, I just trying to kind of put all the pieces together.
Well, I'm probably not the best person to tell you that, but I know that there are specific ads that run on radio for different programs, like for preschool. Whenever it's time to sign up for that, there'll be radio ads that are run. But I can't really respond to that. You can certainly shoot me an email, and I can get you a better response.
Cool. I was just asking for the record. People, whoever gets to watch it will be able, if they had the question. Thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Can we
go through the line and I'll come back.
Alderman Oldenburg, did you have any questions?
Just a couple of quick ones. Thank you for being here. Obviously, there's a little bit of a cost structure challenge with special education, and some of my colleagues have touched on it today. Is there any kind of strategic direction or discussions happening on how we curtail that? We know, right? We know it costs more to educate a special education student than not, and particularly with the county's arrangement. Is there any discussions or a strategic plan of how you might align in this, of course, with this overall city conversation of regionalism? Has there been any overtures to the county in discussions regarding how there could be some cooperation there?
Well, I know that there has been conversations with, between, Vic and SSD over the years. I know that we have a kind of a seat at the table with some of our staff. One of the things that we've really looked at is the over-identification of special education students, both in the county and in the city. So we know that it is a huge area. It is very expensive, and there are requirements that we do not decrease our funding. Once we reach a certain level, we can't reduce the funding on our special education costs unless there are some significant hurdles.
Right.
So we are certainly looking at that and have looked at that over the years.
Okay, great. And then just one more question, and maybe it's probably not your area of specialty, but with respect to the real estate and the assets that the city does have, and it goes to a little bit of Alderman Bosley's question about, the calculus around closing schools, consolidating, et cetera. Do you all have a known sort of value that could potentially be placed or saved with maybe call it current vacant buildings? And is there kind of a strategic plan around repositioning that real estate to kind of get it back on the tax rolls or in the hands of third-party developers, et cetera?
Well, there is a real estate committee. We have a director of real estate also that really maintains that list of assets, closed assets that we have. Some of them are currently for sale, and we often have community members request access to our buildings for various uses.
Do you know if the director of real estate and the real estate committee interacts on a fairly consistent basis with SLDC in terms of kind of some of those assets?
Not that I know of with SLDC, but we do have a member on the board that's on the LRA committee, or I'm not sure what that's called. So I know that there is at least someone at the table there.
And in your mind or in your opinion, do you see that as, if there's an aggressive plan to reposition some of that real estate, real cost savings to the district or at least an increase in revenue as a result of sales of some of those or disposal of some of those assets?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
There was there an additional question by committee members?
Yes, sir. I'm gonna let Alderwoman Boyd go first.
Hello.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good.
I apologize for being late. My question is, I was excited when you were talking about marketing the schools. And so in the 27th, we have created an education committee. And we're really excited because we have a new principal on board. And the schools that we challenge are the schools within our ward. And so our goal is to, the goal for the next 5 years is to work on making those schools having a waiting list. But the question that I'm asking is, and I think that's a lot of concerns of a lot of residents that kids go to those schools. I get really distraught when I have kids that can't read. And so when you're dealing with Northwest Law Academy, so the classes that we're looking for is going to be really focusing on law, but they have to be able to read and comprehend to be able to pass. And we don't want kids graduating and they can't read.
Right.
And so on the marketing piece, when I met with, I don't remember the young lady's name downtown, she said that the principal,
Rachel Stewart.
what's her name?
It was Rachel Stewart. She's gone.
Yeah, well, she had told me the principals market the schools. And so how is that when, like what we're doing, is that how they market it, as a partnership with the community to market those schools, to get people to want to come into those schools?
Well, that is one of our primary ways of marketing, is through the principal. The principal generally is one that best knows the students and the community around the school. So we really have the principal as the central person for all the marketing efforts. Of course, we have a team at a central office that really supports that effort and comes up with various plans based on the schools that have been targeted for additional support, if you will, and they work with the principal to do whatever they feel is the appropriate marketing for that school and for that community. Now, unfortunately, it's a very small team, so it's not like we have enough staff to really reach all the areas that we need to reach. I know that we just recently have hired some part-time recruiters to really assist with some of the efforts, and hopefully that effort will continue. A lot of times it's difficult finding these type of staff to go out and do that type of outreach. So we're looking at different ways to bring in support to help with those recruiting efforts.
So do you think, because I know with the CECs, a lot of them were closed, so do you think that plays a role in the community not being involved because those schools aren't open after 2 o'clock?
Well, I wish I had a good answer to that, but I don't. I know that about the closures of a lot of the CECs. I do know that even for some of the CECs that close, there are various after-school programs. You know, I certainly can't tell you at which sites, but we have a lot of different after-school programs in different schools, so.
Well, Alderwoman Davis, she answered it for me because I was trying to get clarity. Because in our community, in the 27th Ward, I'm proud because the residents stepped up to the plate and said, we can't let these schools close, and they want to do something. And Alderman Boyd and Alderwoman Davis and myself agree the community has to play a role, and it has to be a partnership. And so I'm proud of those residents, but I just don't want it where we don't get enough support from the board to help us accomplish those goals. And so even though we want the building to stay open, to have the community have access to it, but we also want our kids to be able to read fluently and on the level they should read, so they can go to the next level. And everybody's not college material, but a lot of them need to have that knowledge of reading so they can go to the next level in their life. So, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes, and we know that that is a huge focus. I mean, reading is really the core focus for the district because, you know, if you can't read, it's almost like nothing else matters. So that really is a big focus for the district. And part of the transformation plan, a big part of that, you know, I just kind of gave you a high level 5 core things, but all of our, you know, goals and objectives we have defined under those 5 tenets. I mean, reading is really a big, big focus.
So if we ask, if those residents on that committee request and say, this is where we see the shortfalls that are hindering our children, we can come to the board to say, this is what we need from you all to help us accomplish these goals.
Well, I think the more that the board hears directly from the community members, I think it's really good. So whether or not a representative comes to a board meeting and speaks publicly or just, you know, provides something directly to the superintendent or to the board, I think those are very helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we do have a number of board members who are not on our committee who are here today. If I'm just going to be informal, does anyone over there care to ask any questions of Ms. Banks while she's here? No. Okay. Well, as always, Ms. Banks, thank you so much. I hope you get a sense that we really want to create a dialogue with you, and we want to, you know, it's for those who think about this. You know, the city and the school system, in some ways, our futures are very entwined, but when it comes to finances, very frequently we can find ourselves our goals are not necessarily congruent because so much of our revenue comes from economic activities while so much of theirs comes from real estate. So it can put us at a point of conflict, I guess, in some of these economic development issues, but we want to make sure that we have a dialogue, and I'm glad to hear that you and Professor Holland is getting along so well, and we have found him to be a wonderful resource for us. So,
Mr. Chairman, could I make a
oh,
comment?
I'm sorry, Alderwoman Howard had a question.
I'd
Alderwoman?
like to make a comment, too.
Good morning.
Morning.
The only question I had, I may be asking the wrong person. I understand you're in charge of finance, and being a former school employee, I kind of get, you know, you have your own lane. But what I wanted to know is, you know, with the increased attention to charters, you know, there was a time when the school district sort of pushed those aside and tried to, you know, minimize their presence in the city. I know that I understand, I think, that the Board of Education is sponsoring a few charters at this point. Have they?
Well, KIP is a St. Louis Public Schools charter school.
KIP?
KIP. And
Okay.
KIP has several
And I guess
locations.
the medical prep school?
Well, that's not a charter school, that's a district
That's
school.
a sort of a magnet, I guess.
Yes.
And I guess what I would ask, having, you know, had a career in the magnet school system, why has the school district not moved forward with instituting charters as you know, kind of in the magnet school fashion to retain their students? Is that an option financially, or is it not an option? Would there be any gain for the district? I mean, I know the more students you have, the more revenue. I mean, it's that simple. So
Yeah,
am I
well,
asking the wrong person?
Well, I wish it was that simple. And certainly we have looked at different models with charter schools. At one point, we actually had a process where there were proposed charters that were coming to the district looking for sponsorship by the district. It's just very difficult to manage, and especially with our abundance of schools at this point. So it's difficult to bring on additional schools within our financial structure.
What
but-
about converting some of the existing and consolidating? Has that been a thought?
Well, very interesting that you bring that up, because Next year, we are looking at a consortium network, which was presented at the last board meeting, where basically we will take a subset of our lowest performing schools and put them in a consortium, which will then allow them some additional flexibility. So we're always looking for opportunities to do new things that might improve some of our outcomes. So we're very hopeful that this consortium network that we're looking at will be fruitful. So it won't be for the 18-19 year, because we just didn't have enough time to pull that off. It'll be for the following year, so we'll kind of have a year of planning. So that will really give us an opportunity to perform more like a charter school, because they do have more flexibility than a district school. So that's one of the issues that we have, is just the level of flexibility based on the number of regulations that we have to abide by, that the charters do not have to. So,
but if you sponsor charters under the St. Louis Public School District, don't you have that same freedom that a charter would have? If it's a St. Louis Public Schools charter? Or is that a legal problem?
It depends. There are different types of sponsorship.
Charters. Okay.
So it depends. And certainly one of the concerns is with sponsoring a charter school, certainly that has the potential of taking away students from some of our other schools, which creates even more problems for the schools that lose those students. So it's a tough situation that we're trying to figure out the best thing to do. But we've certainly looked at those options.
I mean, I guess the whole thing is retaining our constituency and our residents in the city. I mean, it's a win-win for all of us, and if we don't continue to cultivate our student body and our parents, we're going to be a hollow city. So I really am concerned for that, and I think, I don't know that charters are the complete answer, but I think we need to provide some options for parents and educate parents on what their options are. Because I think there's a lack of that also, is that parents don't understand that there are schools out there for their children. You know, one size doesn't fit all. Good schools, wonderful schools that are offered through the St. Louis public school system. And I think many times people just, St. Louis public schools, and they hit the off switch, so to speak.
Right.
And I don't know if it's PR, parent education early on, lots of options. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the work that the schools do.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. I think that concludes it, Ms.
I wanted
Banks.
to have a comment, if you
I'm
don't
sorry,
mind.
Alderwoman, go right ahead.
Thank you. First of all, let me say thank you for providing us this information. And you know what? It is not as complicated the way you put it together, and it is a complicated financial system. So all I wanted to do is just give a comment for St. Louis Public Schools very quickly. We have not done our job as a city to support the school system in the last 16 years, especially. We went out of our way to promote a different type of education. So if we want to complain and if we want to have things a certain way, then it is up to us to step up to the plate more as well. I have never left the St. Louis Public Schools side in promoting education as a whole for communities. So when people left our communities, left homes abandoned, there's no other option. If you don't have the people, you don't have the children to be in the schools. So I don't blame the public schools for closing buildings because there was no one to be in the building. We have a lot of opportunity here, and I'm hoping that we take it. A lot of what the reasons why we're talking today really has nothing to do with the success of the public schools. It has to do with, I want to blame, I want to stop certain things because I don't understand it. But one of the things that we do know is St. Louis Public Schools has the opportunity to be present in all parts of what we do here. having a member on LRA board, having a member on the TIF commission, having the opportunity, if those would take it, to work with their alderpersons in their wards and communities, hopefully getting community people involved to support their schools, and also know the difference between a babysitting warehouse and a public school that has 174 years of experience and qualified, competent people, and also resources to make the school work. And the school can only work if the parents and the community as a whole. When we're talking about Clay School, I remember the last time it was going to close, but we got all the businesses on North Broadway. Let's come and keep this school open. Malincrot, that's how that community association got started up there. And then brought in Holy Trinity, the Catholic school. There's no reason for them to fail. We're trying to fail. Let's all work together. So there's a way to make public schools more significant. We can have KIP. I was on the school board when we approved KIP to be a part of us. So we need to do this different. And pointing fingers and yelling about the wrong things and not getting on the ground and not getting in the communities, working with people to make sure that this is improved is a waste of rhetoric on all other stands. So I just want to say I support St. Louis Public Schools. I support charter schools when it's needed, when it has a purpose, but not just warehousing children to say, I don't want my child in that school with those people. So hopefully we will get to the right place. I believe the current administration has the right mindset. I'm hoping that we can even do more. And the finances that we have been able to provide based on improved economic development in the city of St. Louis, most especially the last 6 years, helps the St. Louis Public Schools. Because before, there was nothing. There was zero coming from that land and those empty buildings. So I appreciate what you all are doing. I love your superintendent. I love the fact that he put young people on the ground this summer to recruit for the St. Louis Public Schools. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Banks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next on the agenda, and for those who've just come in, we have presentations from outside. Our next is going to be appointments to the Board of Adjustment. Then we're going to see a presentation Federal Reserve. We'll be taking up the Alderwoman from the 20th resolution. All the legislation relative to incentives will be held till the end, and we're going to have those hearings for purposes of fulfilling our obligations because they're publicized, but we will not pass those out of committee. If anyone's schedule prohibits them from being here, it's going to be a long meeting. Let us know. We'll have somebody else handle that legislation for you here before the committee today. Next up, Mary Hart from our zoning. Did you care to come up in it? So we had a request to review the appointments, the mayor's appointments to the Board of Adjustment. We have 3 of them scheduled to hear today. Ironically, the Alderwoman who asked for this to be done is not present with us, but I thought we would give each a couple seconds to introduce themselves, perhaps say why they're interested in serving, and then we can go ahead, and if there's any questions of any of them, we can kind of ask them sequentially. But what is that?
That's fine.
Okay. We'll try to make it as simple as possible. So perhaps each of you can step forward, introduce yourself, say a sentence or two about each of you, and perhaps why or how long you've been there, or what's your interest in serving on the Board of Adjustment, and then we'll open it up to questions of the committee members.
Okay. Chairman Rohde, I'm Frank Oswald. I want to just take a moment to thank everybody for this hearing this morning. I also want to just take the opportunity to thank these members of the Board of Adjustment. As you guys know, these folks are volunteers in our community. They get paid very little by us, but they give quite a great deal of their time to the city every week. I would say between 4 to 6 hours every week. They are down here sitting where you guys dealing with issues that are important to our neighborhoods, to our communities, and trying to weigh all of those various factors, into a decision that I think is pretty much on target generally. So again, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and let each member go ahead and introduce themselves. If you guys got any questions, we'll try to help.
Do we have any
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mona Parsley, and I have been, I believe this is my third term on the board. I sit as the local realtor on the board, and the reason I sit on the board, it's actually very interesting to me. I love to see what's going on. I'm a big proponent of development in the city and helping the city move forward. And a city without growth is a city that is dying. So I'm all about helping build the city and moving forward in those directions.
Thank you, Ms. Parsley. Next.
My name is George Hitt. I've been on the board as an alternate back in 1990 or 92. I came with TWA, and as a TWA group member, we tried to participate within the city, and therefore I was an alternate on the board, and I retired from TWA American Airlines in 2003, and I was placed as a permanent member of the board. I have been within the city of St. Louis, I said, for over some 30-some odd years. I've owned property. My expertise lies in real estate development as well as a community leader. I sit on a lot of NAACP, Urban League. I sit on in council for Jackie Joyner Kersey. I've been a part of this community which actively promotes business in the community, and I'm here to help.
Thank you, Ms. Jett. Mr. Klitzing?
Good morning. My name is Joe Klitzing. I am the required architect on the board. I've been on the board since 2003. I was registered architect in 1984. I have a firm down on Grand and Arsenal. We practically, 90% of my practice has been within the city of St. Louis city limits. Zoning has always been interesting to me because a big part of my practice was restaurants across the country. And quite truthfully, there isn't a restaurant done anywhere that isn't a conditional use. So zoning is always affected when you do restaurants. So my interest on being on the board, I was nominated. I was asked if I wanted to by the building department. I thought I would try it. I've been down here basically every Wednesday for, I guess, 15 years, coming down here and being on the board. Currently, I am the chairman of the board, so other than that, that's my criteria or my experience.
Thank you, Mr. Klitzing, and I might add that Mr. Klitzing designed the interior of my office that I rent on Lindell. So we've had a little experience picking out carpet shades and paint shades and such. Alderman Kennedy is not present currently, I don't believe. Alderman Boyd, do you have any questions?
Sure, I have a question for Joe. I want to test his technical expertise. So if you have open space of 3,000 square feet, what's the seating capacity?
For a restaurant?
For a restaurant or?
Well, let me clarify your question a little bit. Is the 3,000 square feet the total square footage of the restaurant?
Open space.
Open space, customer space? You get one, are you asking occupancy in particular?
Occupancy.
Okay, basically divide the 3,000 square feet by 15.
Okay.
It's kind of unconcentrated table and chairs.
Thank you.
Okay.
Does he get to bill you for that, or you think about it?
No, I just want to know if he agreed with me.
Okay. Alderwoman Davis.
Well, I'm extremely familiar with two of you, and I've been before the committee enough to say that I'm familiar with all of you, really. So I don't have any questions.
Alderman Kotar.
No questions. I would just like to thank the members for their service. Mona's a constituent of mine down in Soulard. I'm in front of the Board of Adjustment quite often, and the 7th Ward has things on there pretty much every week. I appreciate the work you guys do. I know it can often be thankless. Thank you very much.
Alderman Ogilvie.
I don't have any questions for the appointees. I'd also just like to say thank you for your work. I do have maybe one question for either Frank or Mary. A lot of times when the Board of Adjustment makes a decision, there's some particular conditions that are included in that decision. It can be a challenge to keep track of those after the fact. Have we, or can we make an effort to put some of those things online, maybe as part of Geo St. Louis, so that I can remember whether the patio is supposed to close at 6 p.m. or 10 p.m. or without having to go back and bother you for the. I do try to keep a list of things, but it would help if that stuff is more readily available to the public, I think, as well.
I think any of the occupancy permits that are now going through the new online system, the proceedings from the hearing are attached to them. So if you have access to them, they're there that way. We can certainly look at a way at adding them to our citywide website.
There, where, say that again. Where, if I have access to what?
That's funny. We probably can, yeah. Let me work on that. I know what you're asking. What Mary's saying is under our new web-based systems, all the aldermen can have access to that, and you would have to look up into that one individually in our web-based system. But you would like it to go right on to Geo, so it would be easily accessible to everybody. And I think that's something we can accomplish. Not to bring up a bad subject, but I got $0 out of the $100,000 I requested for basically doing IT stuff this year. And actually, Chairman Rohde faced that yesterday because it's interesting. I'd like to get building permits online. You know, he had a situation where he needed a permit, and yes, indeed, it was ready, but unfortunately, that system yet is not online where an email would have gone to the contractor right away, you know, but
So suffice to say, these things are kind of on your radar,
yes,
at least.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bascon.
I don't have any questions. I do have a comment. I just would like to thank you all for what you all do. You all have helped out with some things that kind of went right in my area. I did want to just make it a point, though. I'm sure there are a lot of, I'll be seeing you all a lot in the next coming, hopefully over the next year or so. We should have a lot of people interested in doing some things. Some of those things might not be the best things, so, you know, we might have a lot of community members here, so I would very much appreciate it if you all would continue to listen to the people when we do have, you know, things that are kind of disruptive, and sometimes it might seem like it's a great idea or something that's great for the city, but it might not necessarily be that good for the neighbor. So, and I know you all have made some great decisions beforehand, but as time goes on, you know, hopefully if we get enough attention around things, I think we'll have a lot of people coming in every week asking about the same parcels, maybe trying to, you know, coming back every week, and we might see each other a lot for appeals and a lot of other things. So I would appreciate it if you all continue to be just you know, available for the community to hear what they have to say. So thank you all very much for what you all do.
Okay, Alderman Oldenburg.
No questions. Thank
Okay, that concludes the committee. Was anyone not on the committee had a question or a comment regarding? Raise your hand. No one over there has. I just want to echo what's already been said. We really appreciate the fact that you do your service for the city. I think to make this appropriate, we don't do many of these things. I suspect we should go ahead and have a motion by the committee to approve the mayor's appointments. So we'll go through sequentially. We'll have 3 votes. The chair at this time will entertain a motion that we recommend or sustain the mayor's recommendation of Mona Parsley serving on the Board of Adjustment.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Alderman Boyd, seconded by Alderman Kodar. All those in favor say aye. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis.
Aye.
Alderman Coder.
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvy.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Chairman Rhodey.
Aye.
President Reed. You have 8 aye votes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, next up will be Mr. George Hitt. The chair will entertain a motion for Mr. Hitt.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by the alderman from the 24th, seconded by the alderwoman from the 19th. Hearing no objections, request for previous roll. Hearing no objections for previous roll, we'll consider Mr. Hitt as being recommended out of committee with a dual point. Finally, Mr. Klitzing, the chair will entertain a motion for Mr. Klitzing.
So moved. Second. Previous roll.
Objection. I withdraw.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Trying to beat him up on the price of that bill that you're going to get? Okay, hearing no objections, we'll consider Mr. Klitzing. All of you, thank you very much for coming down here. We're sorry that you had a wait. Hopefully you found the CFO of the school's presentation interesting, and part of the reason why you guys are hopefully volunteering your time is for the future. Thank you all. Next up, I'm going to go, Alderman Oldenburg, this is kind of your pet project, you and Gerard. Did you care to have a couple introductory comments or something? This is for everybody. We're getting back to understand where we are. We're trying to improve the economic viability of the city and the economic well-being of our citizens, and so we have arranged for the Fed to be here. So, Alderman, do you have any introductory comments?
Yeah, just a couple. I think Charles Gascon, is he here, Charles? Great, come on up.
Good, yeah. Brought my own clicker.
So just by a quick way of introduction, just to also update this committee on where we are with evaluating our economic development incentives next to performance measures and metrics. We thought it best, Dr. Hollins and I thought it best to go to some experts who have a lot of this knowledge. We talked about bringing in partners who have sort of the technical expertise to help us with the information that we conjure from the city and SLDC and the other departments to put next to our economic development incentive uses so we can truly trend them to see how they're working and where it may lead us. Again, all in the spirit of that same project and evaluating those measures. We reached out, and Charles has graciously decided to come and present sort of existing conditions along with a lot of demographic and economic information that currently exists in St. Louis and probably some trends as well. So this should be a very informative presentation. Thanks, Charles.
So I ask you all not to sneak ahead on my slides. I know you're going to be tempted to, but I'll try to get through everything, and then we'll work our way through them. Feel free to interrupt me as we go if you have questions or you want clarification on some of the information that I have in here. For those of you who are not aware, the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis here, we have about 1,200 employees downtown, about 1,500 total employment. Most of the other employees are in our branch offices in Louisville, Little Rock, and Memphis. We're part of the whole Federal Reserve System, so the Board of Governors in D.C. is the federal agency that oversees our Reserve Bank, but our Reserve Bank is technically a nonprofit organization in the city. So for those that didn't know that, if you have other questions about the Fed, feel free to ask as we go. My talk today is going to focus on the St. Louis metro area as well as the city, so I'll kind of break things out into a couple different ways. I want to look at kind of how we go about measuring the performance of regions and say, like, okay, what's an indication that a place is doing well? Population growth is one that often comes up, but I think there's a lot of different pieces to that we want to look at. Hopefully, by the end of this, you've got some numbers that provide some context to things that we probably all see and feel, and just kind of get a better idea of what that order of magnitude looks like. So we know places in the country that are doing well tend to be like San Jose and Boston, but like how far away are we from those places? And I'll show you that they're probably the biggest outliers in the country, and that there's actually probably a bigger cluster of places like St. Louis. And then hopefully you walk away with probably a little bit more of a regional mindset and understanding of where the city falls in the whole metro area and its role that it really plays in here. And also kind of how national trends ultimately push down to the local area. So basically, if you take the profile of the St. Louis metro area, it looks very similar to the nation. So when the U.S. economy is doing well, we see a lot of strong growth in the region. It's very rare that our region sees a contraction when the national economy is humming along pretty well. It's because basically a lot of our businesses are providing goods and services. If you guys can't hear me, just let me know, okay? A lot of our businesses are providing goods and services across the whole country, across the whole world. So and we need those national trends to really provide a big picture. So with that, I'm just going to take one slide, talk about the U.S. economy, what the outlook looks like. I think you can take those numbers and kind of push them down to the local region. So at the Fed, our mandate is price stability and maximum employment. So that's kind of where I'm going to mainly focus here. Current growth in the economy has been a bit stronger than we anticipated, and it's picked up in 2018. The forecast for the first half of this year are looking pretty good. So last year we saw a 2.6% growth year over year. The forecast that the Fed has right now is 2.8%, and probably a bit of a slowdown kind of in the long run. Long run steady state growth for the U.S. economy right now is just under 2%. Which is definitely slower than historical norms. A lot of this is declines in worker productivity and declines in just overall population and workforce growth. So if you think about what the outlook is, it's not really for accelerating growth over the long period. It's actually probably a gradual slowdown back to this trend rate of growth. Unemployment rate's currently just under 4%. The forecast for the year is that it's going to continue to go down. Here in the region, we tend to have unemployment rates that are a bit below the national average. But generally speaking, these trends that you see on the national level, more or less the St. Louis area mimics those trends. There might be a little level shift up or down, but for the most part, those trends are going to be the same. Again, long run unemployment rate is 4.5%. So we would expect over long periods of time that unemployment rate to kind of drift back up. Inflation, it's been a bit weaker. Most of that was due to kind of declines in oil and commodity prices, but it's really picked back up in recent months. So the forecast from the Fed right now is that inflation rates are probably going to rise a bit. Talking to businesses around the area, there's clearly industries like steel and transportation and aluminum, places where prices have risen pretty sharply. On the flip side, food and commodity prices have really come down a lot. So there's kind of a trade-off there, but when you average it all out, you're looking at about 2% inflation in the region. St. Louis is, the numbers that we have for that is more or less in line with the national numbers here. And then obviously the role of the Fed is to set interest rates. So if you look at the policy rate right now, it ended last year at 1.2%. We've had a couple of rate increases over the first part of the year. The expectation is that the funds rate will get up to about 2.4% by the end of the year. So this is going to be the rates in which banks lend to one another overnight. So obviously mortgage rates and everything else will adjust accordingly. Again, long run is about 2.9%. So there's probably some continued tightening over the next couple of years. There's some upside risks, I think, to the forecast. I mean, we just had a big tax overhaul. It's still unclear exactly how that's going to play out, but to the extent that, it gives firms an incentive to make investments and increases productivity, that should be pretty good. On the downside, obviously, there's a lot of talk about trade right now. We're still trying to figure out how that's going to play out in the broader economy. Just quickly, if you look, this map's showing you growth in 2016, 2017. I think the big thing to take away is a lot of the boom that we've seen over the last year or so, it's come pretty much out of Texas. I think if you look kind of across trends, we basically see about the same growth in the nation in most places outside of Texas over the last year. So while there's been an acceleration, that really hasn't shown up in most places other than in the state of Texas. And again, energy playing a big role there. This chart's showing you growth for the St. Louis metro area. So this is going to be the 14-county region where everybody lives and works. And basically, you'll see that growth in the St. Louis economy has been slower than the national average for many years. Right now, there's actually been a bit of a convergence, but 1.6% growth is what we've seen in the region in the first quarter. Yeah. Do you guys have a question? Go for it. This is the metro area, yeah. 14 county, yeah, I'll show a map in a second, so we'll get to that. And I'll explain to you why I look at the metro area in 1 second, too. This chart just shows you kind of those last data points on where St. Louis metro falls relative to some other metros in the region. So things have been a bit slower. But again, this is consistent with generally slow population growth in the region. Per capita numbers probably look a little bit better. Obviously, I think everybody around knows how well Nashville's doing, so they tend to be the shining star in this part of the country. Okay, so why the heck do I look at metro areas? This map is showing you kind of the metro areas in the country. There's about 381 of them. There's about 100 that are over 1 million people. These are defined by the Office of Management and Budget, and the way that they're defined is you have to have a core urban population of about 50,000 people, and then it's going to be those core counties and then the surrounding counties with at least 25% of the population commuting into those central counties, okay? So the core counties that make up the St. Louis metro area are going to be St. Louis County, St. Louis City, St. Charles County, St. Clair, and Madison. Those are the core counties where all the jobs are generally located. And then you kind of go out one more ring, and in those counties, at least a quarter of the population are commuting into that core business area for work. So that's really, these are the economic boundaries that make up our region. And so when you look at economic impact studies, there's a lot of these spillovers. So we'll talk about kind of how the city falls in within the region in a second. In population, the metro area is about 2.6 million people. That's about the same size as Denver or Baltimore. So our city population's just over 300,000. If you were to look at Denver's about 700,000 in the city of a metro area of about 2.6 million. Baltimore's about 600,000 in a metro area of about 6 million. So I'll show you some density plots to kind of get to that. But that's basically where we're going to fall. New York's going to be the big bar here. So the New York metro area, if you took every MSA from the 71st down all the way to 300, added up that population, that's the same size as New York City, as the New York metro area. So it's a huge behemoth in when we look at look at the metro area. The reason that I look at metro areas is because they're really the drivers of growth in our country. 90% of economic activity that comes out of the United States is being produced in these metro areas. And if you look at the chart here, 64% of it's just coming from these top 50 metro areas. In Missouri, what I've done is I've taken kind of employment by county in order to allocate the St. Louis metro area to show you kind of roughly speaking how the state of Missouri breaks out. But you did the same thing for Kansas City, but basically about 41% of the state's output is going to be generated by the counties that make up the St. Louis metro area in Missouri. Another 25% of it's going to be those counties in Missouri in the Kansas City metro area. So it shows you that we're clearly more rural in this state, but again, the big driver is going to be this metro area. Okay, so here's the one economics term that I'm really going to hammer home today.
You just said we're more rural.
Yeah, so I use non-metro as being considered rural. So national is 11%, Missouri is about 17%, yeah. Okay, so here's the one term that we're going to hammer home today because I think it's really important when you think about growth and prosperity, and it's agglomeration. So what this means is that there's benefits that come when people locate together in cities. Where do those benefits come from? Well, one of them's pretty straightforward. It's that you save in transportation costs. It's just easier to trade goods and services with people when they're close by to you. And that's kind of the main reason that, as you think about the reason that this city formed in the first place, was because this became a trading post. Everybody came in here. Now, you would expect that maybe with new technologies that will go away. But what's actually happened is the opposite. And take healthcare as an example. What's happened is that in order to attract workers, workers want to be able to look at different employers and have different opportunities of where they're going to work. They don't want to work at a hospital in a rural area because if they don't like their boss, they got to move towns. If you live in the St. Louis metro area and you want to work at a hospital, you have many different places that you can choose from. If you don't like your boss, you don't like the culture, you can go someplace else to work. So what you've actually seen is with technology, more and more businesses have concentrated in these metro areas and then using remote access, telecommunications, telemedicine, these things like that, it's allowed you to have more and more concentration in these metro areas. So even though you get savings from like maybe shipping goods across the country, when it comes to pulling in workers, there's more and more of an attraction to these cities. The other piece is economies of scale. So if you think about infrastructure, if you can spread it over more people, the cost per person goes down. So you don't want everyone to have their own airport. While we'd love to have our own airport, it's just not cost effective for us to all have our own airport. So you want one airport and you want to make it as efficient as possible, have as many people coming in and out of it as possible. So you want to share those big capital spending plans. And then the last part is workers with industry-specific skills locate in metro areas where there's already a lot of workers with those jobs, and then firms kind of come along the same way. That's why it's hard to attract tech people to the St. Louis area. Same as the challenge you have with hospitals. If I don't like my job at Google, I can go find a job at Apple or someplace else. That's a harder thing to do in some smaller metro areas. St. Louis is pretty well positioned in a lot of fronts. I know we do have a lot of concentration in financial advisors, for example, for that reason. So when you think about where we have big competitive advantages, it's going to be where we have large clusters of workers already, because then firms will come in and try to pull from those workers. So this kind of, it permeates and then it perpetuates all through forward when you think about what areas are growing and which areas are contracting. Okay. So with that being said, I think the easiest way to kind of capture this is looking at population density relative to overall productivity of a region. So basically what we're saying is when people are more densely packed together, on average, they're more productive. I could put dots for every metro area in the country and you're going to get this trend line is going to be even tighter. But then I would never be able to point out where St. Louis is, so I didn't want to do that. And as you can see, basically places like New York that are really densely populated, while there are a lot of costs to that density, overall, on average, people are more productive. San Jose and Boston stand out up here for one main reason. It's that educational attainment's really high. So in Boston, you've got agglomeration of universities. So if I want to be a top professor, the best place to move to is going to be Boston. As a result of that, a lot of firms have moved to partner with universities and have grown and been incredibly productive. So in the Boston metro area, about 50% of the population has a college degree. In St. Louis, it's about 30%. San Jose, again, that's our tech hub, so that's the main reason that's up there. Bridgeport, Connecticut, that MSA has all the hedge funds, so that's just an accounting trick as to why they stand up there. Okay, so I'm going to dig down into this density profile to kind of give you some ideas of what it looks like. The easiest way to compare density across regions is to use City Hall as the center of the metro area. The reason we use City Hall is because typically that's where the metro area was founded, and these are historic buildings that don't move. It's very rare that a region would move its City Hall someplace else. So it works out pretty well as a center of the region. This is what the profile of St. Louis looks like. So you're looking at kind of a peak about 3 miles away from City Hall is where we're going to have the highest density of population. If we looked at Denver, it's going to peak at about 15,000 people per square mile at the city center, and then kind of gradually decline from that point forward. As you can see, kind of comparing St. Louis and Denver, once you get out about 20 miles, this is where sprawl really starts to take hold in our region. And Baltimore is about 25,000 people per square mile at its city center. On average, if you take an MSA of about $1 million to $2.5 million, that's going to be closer to the profile of the St. Louis region. And the reason I mention this is because a lot of times people's first impressions of the region come when they come to St. Louis for a convention or a baseball game or concert or whatever it is. And what you hear a lot is, wow, you know, where are the people? And it's because they think at 2.6 million people, they should see 25,000 people per square mile at the city center, and that's not what we're seeing. Now, this isn't unique just to St. Louis. I would say that if you look at the profile of a place like Indianapolis or Louisville, Kentucky, or Memphis, it's going to be closer to St. Louis than it is going to be to kind of our Baltimore or our Denver. But these are our neighbors in size, so that's why I put those on here. That's kind of the 2.5 to 5 million. So, you know, 17,000 people at the core. Okay, so now this is data from the Census Bureau, and what I have here are 2 heat maps. And what it's showing you is the density of, I don't have population, this is going to be workers, so the numbers are a bit different. But what it's showing you is the density of the region based on where workers live. And you can see kind of the sprawl that's taken place in our region, particularly out to the west. And in the city, you kind of have, South City is probably the part that has the highest density of workers per square mile, about 3,000 to 5,000 workers per square mile. I'll send you guys a link to this website through Gerard. You can dive right into these maps and zoom in as far as you want. I spent hours playing around with it. When we look at the density of jobs, so this is going to be the flip side based on where these people actually work, what you see is that the city is really, still remains the concentration of jobs for the region. So you're looking at about, in the downtown area right here, about 50,000 jobs per square mile. And then you can see kind of the Midtown area, and then obviously this is going to be Clayton out here. But these are going to be the highest places where you have the highest level of density of jobs in the region. You see a little bit of this kind of sprawl out to the west, but nothing like you see when you look at households. Now, if I look at kind of this jobs density kind of relative to Baltimore and Denver, what you see is actually the peaks in Denver are around 130,000 people per square mile at their city center, and Baltimore is about 100,000 per square mile. If you go at St. Louis over time, we saw a peak in about 2010 of around 70,000 jobs per square mile. That was kind of where we hit the highest point. It has trended up in recent years, so that has been a good thing.
I'm sorry, what year did you say was our peak?
2010 was 71,000.
But that was after the downturn.
It was.
It was back in the 70s.
What time frame? I mean,
Well, so that's going to be concentration. So we can go back to 1992, 93.
Okay, I was gonna say,
yeah, we're not going to be able to go
couldn't
back
be the
really far.
50s, yeah.
Yeah, there's no way you could go to the 50s and get this level
Okay,
of data accuracy. Nashville, Kansas City are more or less in line with St. Louis, so I would say that as kind of as a benchmark, about 50,000. Again, this is just to kind of put, well, I think we already know this, but I think it's nice to have some numbers to kind of get behind it. Okay, so now how do we measure the well-being of the region? I like this quote from Ed Glazer. He's an economist out of University of Chicago, because it goes beyond just the population piece. And it says, if a place is doing well, then employers should be willing to pay more for workers in that area. People should be willing to pay for access. And then people should want to move there. Okay? So I'm going to put some numbers behind this quote to kind of give you an idea of where we stand. So willing to pay more for workers. Well, it's true, but for the most part, the earnings profile is a lot flatter. What you end up seeing is that places where workers are more productive, that's the places where the workers are in the highest wages, which, again, shouldn't be that surprising. If people can produce more per hour, they're going to get a higher raise than the person next to them. So when you start to think about, well, what do we do to raise wages, it's ultimately gets down to, at the fundamentals, what can we do to increase worker productivity in the region? And there's a lot of different pieces to that. It can be providing businesses with better infrastructure. It can be making it easier for them to get to work. But St. Louis is more or less in the middle of the pack on this, so our wages are not that far out of line with what we would expect to see given our relative productivity. In some sense, they're actually pretty high. People should be willing to pay for access. So cost of living, I think, often gets touted as a benefit in business attraction, and that if you have low cost of living, that's a desirable thing. And I can understand that, being that I chose to live here as well, but I would tell you, if you had a choice between buying a Maserati and a Civic, money wasn't an object, you would say the Maserati is a better car. Same thing's true when you think about cost of living. The places that are high cost of living, Honolulu, right? I think we would all say that's a wonderful place to live because it's sunny all the time and the temperature is like 75 degrees. So cost of living is really a measure of quality and amenities and things like that. And that's part of the reason why St. Louis ends up falling pretty low down on these cost of living measures, is because it's how much you can take home. So I might buy the Civic because then I got more money in my pocket to do all of these other things with, but it doesn't mean that it's a Maserati. And so I think you have to think of cost of living as generally a negative. A low cost of living is not a positive indication of quality. What's that?
I'm just saying that you have to balance economics.
Yeah. So, and you take a house, you move it from one place to another, the same thing happens. You take the exact same house, you put it in one area, it's more expensive because that's the desirable place to be. So yeah, you see Honolulu, San Jose, way up at the top here. New York City's got tons of amenities. So that ends up really up at the top. San Diego, again, weather's perfect all the time. So you see where that shows up. Yeah, Nashville, Kansas City, St. Louis end up being kind of below average on here. And I'll come back to how this maps out into wages in a minute. And then people should move to the area. So that's generally an indication. And for this, I took a really long perspective, and I said, okay, if the metro area grew at the national rate since 1970, we'd have a metro area of about 4 million people. So that's kind of the number to think about where the shortcoming is. The city is about 308,000, and again, we've seen a pretty steady decline. If the city grew at the MSA's rate, we'd have about 700,000 people in the city, which actually, when you compare that number to what you see in Denver or Baltimore, that's actually a more comparable number. So that kind of provides that framework. Now there's some economists out of University of Pennsylvania that put these county projections together back in 2000. And the way they do this is it's mostly a demographic model. So what they find is that the biggest drivers of population growth over the long run are going to be the average age of your population, and then the share of your population that's foreign born is a really good indication of inward migration. And then the average age of your housing stock is going to be the other one within regional adjustments. The share foreign born has two impacts. So it's inward migration, but typically people who are migrating to this country, they're also in their prime working age. So it has a secondary effect of lowering your average age of your population as well, which means that you're more likely to have children than pass away. So that's really the benefits from the immigration side of things. And if you take this model, what you basically see is that the expectation was that St. Louis's population should have kind of steadily grown. Due to outward migration, we've basically flatlined over the last 10 years. But what the model also shows you is that it was pretty well predicted that this kind of suburbanization was going to occur. So St. Charles trends have basically matched up with what demographics and housing stock would have shown, and the declines in the city are more or less matching up with what these projections look like.
Charles, let me ask you this. So
yeah.
What happened, what did the cities do right that we did wrong, per se, where their growth was consistent with the national average as ours sprawl?
For the whole region, I think you could look to a handful of different things since 1970. I think when you look at the average kind of in this picture, Nashville, Indianapolis, Chicago, they're all in this cluster, okay? So keep that in mind. So what pushes this up a lot is going to be the growth out west in Texas, in Florida, places like that. So it's not necessarily the case that you could have said, well, we're going to do everything, we can't just pick up and move to Texas and assume that we're going to get all the foreign migration that comes in. So I don't think that you could ever really expect to get up to that 4 million number, because we just haven't seen it in the middle of our country.
So I'm just wondering, was it policy issues, government policy issues? Was it infrastructure issues that we didn't grow or we rapidly declined?
I think when you look over longer periods of time, infrastructure is a challenge, for sure. The biggest driver is always going to be inward migration. And if you look at where people who are coming, I mean, let's put it this way, right? If you, and I'll get to your question, and I think it's going to be as much as you can do to be an open society and welcome people from the outside, that's number one. And the reason I say that is if you were to move to any place in the world right now, it's either going to be a place that's sunny or it's going to be some place that you know somebody else or you've had a family member that's gone there. And so when you think about what is it that you need to do in order to bring people in from outside, it's you need to start to have a strong foundation base that ultimately allows people to come into the region and feel comfortable and then stay. And that's a big challenge. And that's a challenge of cultural changes. That's, I mean, right? I mean, there's a lot of different pieces to that. But ultimately, if it's one piece, that's what it is. It's like you have to figure out a way to allow people to be welcome. If you look at the share of foreign-born population in the St. Louis metro area, it's like 4.5%. Most metro areas in the top 50, you're talking about 15%. So we have a very insular society in this region, and that is part of the reason why we are where we are.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, this, I think it's worth noting that that's pretty good in the medium term. Now, this is only from 2000 forward. Here's where the biggest shortcoming is coming from. So we look at St. Louis County, the demographics, the housing stock, the average age, would have projected that the county's population should have gone from a little over 1 million to, adding about 80,000 people. But that hasn't happened. I mean, population in the county has really declined. Same things happened in many of the other kind of outlying counties in the region. But St. Louis County is, if you wanted to point to one county that's caused this shortcoming in this demographic projection, it's going to be the challenges in St. Louis County. So I think that's worth noting for the region, that a lot of the struggles that we see here are similar struggles that you're seeing in the county.
And actually, in a way, if you look at the economics, when you balance that out, St. Louis County really is in worse condition than we are.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of stabilization factors that we worked on in the last 10 years that can allow us to build faster, whereas they didn't. They made some assumptions.
Yep.
And so they're falling faster and harder.
Mm-hmm. Now, if we look at the region, I mean, okay, the colors aren't great here, but basically every county in the region over the last 5 years has lost population except for St. Charles County. The city's lost population, but I didn't add these up. But when I squint and look at this, I actually probably see more census tracts that added population than lost population. So while on net the population declined, there are more places where you've seen some steady increases, and the declines have really been concentrated in the northern part of the city. When we look at migration, I thought this was really fascinating. So this idea of westward expansion, this is showing migration flows in the city, so county migration into the city and then out. And what you can see is these dark brown counties in southern Illinois, those counties lost population to the city, so more people moved into the city than moved out to those counties. So we've seen that the people that are moving in are typically moving in from southern Illinois into the city, and then on net we're losing people to St. Charles County and St. Louis County. Those would be the two places. But I think we should also note that there's more people from Chicago moving here than are here moving to Chicago. So it's not the same for Nashville, but it is the case for Chicago. So migration is definitely westward, and that's where we're bringing our people in from. So when I look at growth, it's not the fact that you can take like this room. If we just put another 100 people in it, there would just be less for everybody. So you can't say that just population growth alone is going to make everybody better off. I mean, you can take one block, and if you just dump a whole bunch of rich people in there, yeah, average incomes just went up, but that doesn't mean that the people that were living there before are doing better. And so there are a lot of costs to kind of strong population growth. And you're seeing places like Nashville in particular, they're really struggling with this. They don't have the public infrastructure in place. So they've seen kind of their inner suburb areas, housing prices have gone up really dramatically. With new assessments, that's causing more gentrification. So these are real problems. Some might say that they're good problems to have, but they're still problems. So I think it's worth noting that as you think about growing the region and adding more people, you can't build Metrolink overnight, right? So, but you can have influxes of people from like, new companies coming in or things like that can cause real frictions and challenges. So I'm going to touch upon some of those and kind of and explain where they show up and how they can be addressed. There's not much we can do about air quality within our region without kind of addressing it nationally. The reason I mention this is because when we look globally, this is the #1 problem. So if you think about fast-growing cities in the world, what's their #1 problem? It's the fact that the people can't breathe. So I think it's often overlooked, but I think it's really important to note. Part of the reason that St. Louis tends to have poor air quality is just geography, reliance on coal power, being in a river valley. Those things combined make it so our air quality is not as nice as it should be. Riverside and LA end up in the same positions for similar issues. Versus kind of East Coast cities, just due to the trade winds, tend to be over on this side, which is why New York, relative to LA, is pretty far down here. So it's an issue, but it's an issue that I think as a nation we've thought about and we've started to address, but it's one we can't overlook. Commuting. Okay, this is a big one. So we spend an average of about 25 minutes commuting to work a day. So that's about 50 minutes round trip. Now, when you put that into dollar terms based on like the average output per worker or average hourly wages, you're talking about like $8,000 a year per person in output that you're losing just because you're driving to work. Or $5,000 a year in lost wages based on like about $25 an hour wage, which is the average for the region, in lost wages because people are spending time commuting. You get up to a place like New York City and you're talking about an average 40-minute commute to work. And New York's one of the most productive places. So this is a real big challenge here when you're starting to think about what's going on. And as much as you see in the press about kind of revitalization of urban areas, when you look at the data, what you're seeing is urban sprawl continues to happen more and more. We have seen some shifts of more people moving into city centers, but it's a really narrow group of people that's doing that. It's people that are college educated and white and young. That's the only group that's actually moving into urban areas. The other groups are continuing to move out into the suburban areas. I'm working on a research paper right now on the impact of remote working and telecommuting on urban sprawl. And we just started playing with the numbers, but I thought one of the things that was interesting that I'd share with you is that there's more people in this metro area that work remotely than take public transit. Yeah. So only about 2% of our population in the St. Louis metro area takes public transit to work. It's typically, in the top 50, you're talking about 7% of the population is going to take public transit. We have between 2 and 5% of our population that's working remotely. The challenge with working remotely, from the numbers that I'm looking at, is that people actually end up driving the same amount because they just move further out, and then they only drive into work 3 days a week, and when they do, they're driving longer distances. And then they drive more for leisure. So there's some interesting challenges that are going on there. For the most part, in St. Louis, 84% of people drive alone. In kind of the top 50 metros, you're talking about 70% of people drive alone to work. So even though we're less dense, we tend to have pretty high commute times. And I was talking to some businesses yesterday. We had a fast food chain in for a conversation. And what the lady was telling me was that one of the biggest challenges that they have in the region is there's areas that they want to serve, but because they don't have access to public transit, they can't find workers. So they're putting in these businesses, and then they're putting in automated kiosks and stuff like that because they just don't have workers to work. I mean, you put the Amazon facility in Edwardsville, and I think they're running direct bus lines now out there from parts of the region in order to bring workers in. So it's not the case that, you know, I think the joke around the region is everything's a half hour away, but that's only if you have a car. Yeah, 20 minutes. Yeah, and so this goes up with density. I think I already talked about this a little bit, which is why you get a push for, you know, things like driverless cars, increased public transit, businesses moving to suburbs to be closer to workers, ways to reduce this commute time because you can save on things. So just to dive into these commutes a little bit more in the region, what I'm showing you here are going to be numbers of basically where people live and where people work. So what you see is where residents work. So there's about 45% of city residents work in St. Louis County. About 42% of those residents work in the city. The rest of them work in kind of other surrounding counties. If you looked in 2005, there would have been a shift. So in 2005, there was kind of more residents working in the city than working in the surrounding counties. So there's more people making the backward commute, so to speak, in the region. When you dig into these numbers based on age, there's not a whole lot of difference. When you look based on incomes, again, these patterns tend to persist. 1 in 4 city workers are residents. Most of them are coming in from the county, and then the rest of them are coming in from all other counties. So that number's not right, because that does not add up to 100. But these two numbers are, for sure. So yeah, 1 in 4 city workers are actually residents. And that's generally been more or less stable, declined a little bit. One thing to note here is that even though this number, the 2005 employment for the region is higher than 2015, this is kind of because you had this big dip in 2010, and then there's been some recovery there. So this has not been a steady trend downward. It's been kind of a decline and now a movement back up. So we're still not back at 2005 employment, but it's moving up in that direction. The other thing to note here is, yeah, there's more workers than there are residents. So we really are, in a lot of ways, that employment hub for the region. So income inequality, I think you can split this a lot of different ways. What I'm showing you here is going to be income inequality for the metro area again, because the people that are working and living in these places are all over the place. And what you see for St. Louis is our income inequality numbers tend to actually be lower on average than we see in a lot of metro areas. What doesn't show up here is kind of where there's also consistent divides along things like race and education that are a lot stronger in the St. Louis area than they might be in some of these other areas. So the headline inequality numbers actually look pretty good for the region versus a place like San Jose and Boston. Again, migration of a lot of high-income individuals into these regions has pushed up income inequality and made places unaffordable. I think where we actually get to, I'll get to it in a second, where I think a lot of the big frictions come up in the region is not the inequality number, it's upward mobility. It's can you move from the 25th percentile up higher? And those numbers don't look as good for the region. So I think often when we think about these frictions, we talk about it in terms of inequality. I prefer to look at it in terms of mobility because I think that's really what we're thinking about. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going to take average incomes, but I'm going to adjust them for cost of living. So take out that 10% lower cost of living. And based on those numbers, St. Louis actually looks pretty good. So it's 10% lower cost of living, but we tend to have relatively high wages for the region. So it's actually some of the highest real incomes in the country can be found in the St. Louis metro area. So our jobs are typically pretty well paid. and it allows us to attract some pretty good talent to the region, although there are some frictions there. But relative to going to like Springfield, where wages are significantly lower than they are here, and their cost of living is pretty much about the same. So we have been able to do a pretty good job of adjusting, keeping nationally competitive wages in places where we have to attract talent, and giving those benefits to workers instead of businesses kind of sticking them in their back pocket. So living standards tend to be pretty high here. If I look at median household income, this is kind of what the map looks like for the region. So highest median household incomes are going to be in St. Charles County. The one thing to note is there's a change in the scaling. So even though the color codings are the same here, this scale maxes out at 69,000 to 76,000. So that's going to be kind of the range for St. Charles County versus the city map. The darkest color is going to be 59 to 69,000. So pretty much every census tract in the city is going to have a lower median household income than the median household income in St. Charles when you average it all out. So I think that's important to distinguish when you kind of look at these two maps. Clearly, like the biggest changes over the last 5 years or so have been kind of in the downtown area where we've seen pretty fast population growth of kind of younger, high-income people moving into the region. And then again, in the central corridor is where we've seen the biggest gains. Generally, income growths haven't been that great in the region relative to the national average. So although the picture kind of shows a similar picture in a lot of ways, the growth numbers haven't been so good. And then when we look at housing affordability, so I kind of touched on this briefly, generally speaking, housing's affordable in the region. The number I'm showing is the median home value relative to the median household income. So the way to think about this is how much annual income or how many years of income do you need to buy a house? So in St. Louis in the city, it's about 3.3 times. So if my annual income's $50,000, in 3 years I could buy a house worth $150,000. That's kind of how you would read this number. The region, generally, housing is more affordable. That's not surprising. As you go further and further out, housing gets more affordable. That's the reason we have sprawl in the first place. In the city, the place that really stands out is Central West End. That number right here is 18 when you look at housing cost relative to median household income. So 18 times median household income is the number that you get in that area. And that's kind of been that way for a long time. So as you can see, it hasn't really jumped in recent years. It's actually always been that way. But those are the affordability numbers that you get in the region. And there hasn't been much change there. So this is the upward mobility chart. So this comes from a research paper from some economists out of Harvard University. They actually got data from the IRS. And we're able to go back all the way to the 1980s and track parents' income and children's income and get measures of upward mobility. And so the only number that I'm showing here is one real piece to this. But what I'm doing is they're taking parents in the 25th income percentile, so kind of below average, in the kind of the lower 25% of income, and then saying, of those parents that had children, where are their children at age 30? So there's one thing to take away right away, which is every number here is higher than 25, which shows you just how important being in these large metropolitan areas is for providing people with opportunity. It's not until you get down into the smaller cities and into the non-metro areas that you see people getting stuck at the 25th income percentile on average. So that's the reason, and when I talk about agglomeration at the beginning, this chart really captures that in a lot of ways, which is pretty much on average across all these places, even in Memphis, which is the lowest on the chart. If your parents were in the 25th income percentile, by age 30, on average, you're going to be around the 32nd, 34th income percentile. So still well below average, but that's progress. And St. Louis is pretty low kind of overall in the distribution. So that shows that, yes, you don't have as much opportunity as you have in a place like San Jose or Boston, which again, those are places that are growing really fast, but you are seeing a lot of upward mobility in those regions. So this is kind of I think, a really important statistic to think about when you start to think about what progress looks like. It's not just growth in averages, it's really, are you providing mobility up for people? So just kind of some final thoughts, and I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have. I think with a few exceptions, being a lot of it San Jose and Boston is really prosperous regions, most major metro areas from an industrial composition side of things are more similar than they are different. So I think that's worth taking away. So you can look to a place like Boston and look to a place like San Jose and say, like, they're doing everything great, but us in Indianapolis and Louisville and Chicago, we're kind of the bulk, and that's where everybody else really stands. There's only a few real main outliers that we see, which is why, again, there's more people from Chicago moving to St. Louis, because they see those same challenges. There are challenges to population growth that I think you need to manage in order to improve well-being. And I think you can even take this beyond the metro area down to local areas as well. That being said, there are ways to increase output in the region and prosperity without just adding more workers. The biggest ones are finding ways to increase population density, because that has a lot of agglomeration effects and cost savings. And then increasing educational attainment ultimately is a huge factor in here. So workers have to have the skills to meet the requirements of the jobs. But being able to make it kind of easy for workers to change from one employer to the next is where the density part really comes in. And I think it's easy to overlook in the St. Louis region is if I work for Monsanto and I don't like working there, as you see, a lot of those similar jobs have all concentrated in that region, which makes it easy for people to change jobs, because they don't have to sell their house and go move to like Edwardsville or something like that to go work there because of these long commutes. And that's a huge advantage that the city has, and that we have the infrastructure to allow people from all over the region to get in either by car or public transit. And as you get agglomerations of businesses, people can change jobs and find out what the most efficient match is, and that's what allows people to be productive. So if you don't like what you're doing and you're wasting half your time on your computer, you can quit your job and go, work someplace else where you're being more productive. And that's where the density piece really can play a big role in having centralized job growth and concentration. And then I think this piece isn't as huge in the region, but I think it's important to keep in mind, which is just because we have low cost of living doesn't mean that you can attract talent to the region by paying them lower wages. I mean, once I make the cost of living adjustment, if my wage is the same, I would rather be in Honolulu. So you got to pay me extra money to stay here so I can go on a vacation to Hawaii when I want to. So that's, I think, the way that you really have to think about cost of living and wage adjustments. And then per capita incomes are going to grow, and I think that's a statistic that we often look at. And the question that we have to ask deep down is, have incomes on average gone up because of migration of high-income jobs to the region, or is it because we have upward mobility? And it's not something that we often get data on, so it's something that you just kind of have to ask and think about. Is, are we having growth because more people are moving in, and are we also providing opportunities for the people that are there to be successful? Shameless plug. Okay, so everything we do at the Fed is free, so I'm not going to ask you guys for anything, but we put out a lot of different regional reports on a wide variety of topics, from looking at the ag economy. I'm actually working on a paper right now that looks at differences in teacher salaries across the region, so that's a topic that we're doing some research on. We post them all on our website, so if you are inclined to find out more about what's going on in the area, this is kind of a quick shop to go to look at. The second half of these slides throughout here, I'm not going to go over, but I just provided as a supplement, but they're going to have census tract level maps and county level maps for kind of some other key statistics for the area that you guys can look at as a reference. So with that, if anybody has any questions, I'm
Charles,
happy to answer
thanks
them.
so much. I find this fascinating stuff, and we're in the process of, it appears that we're on the verge of getting an economic development plan for the city, and so I'm sure this is all very, very good things. Two quick questions before I turn it over to the committee. One is, do you all contract outside parties to do research? For example, like if the city of St. Louis had a stadium offer or, a large economic development opportunity, we always, I think there's a fair amount of skepticism for feasibility studies that are, commissioned. And I think the Fed's credibility would be far higher.
I mean, I could get a dartboard and throw numbers and give you similar numbers, but yeah, so we don't do it for exactly that reason. We won't do impact studies because a lot of speculation assumptions go into it. Now, that being said, we do look at kind of broader economic trends, and if it's theoretical research or publications for peer-reviewed journals that look at some of these things, absolutely.
I was under the impression you all did an impact study on the minimum wage if the city adopted.
So I did that just because I was curious. Yeah.
Okay.
So mostly because of the migration stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was just, I was like, okay, well, I think for you guys, I thought it'd be worthwhile to know kind of how many workers we have versus residents we have and kind of the policy stuff. So yeah, those are just kind of on us. Like if it's interesting, we'll look at it. But we don't commission that stuff out, and everything that we do, we put out as public reports.
And then I guess the other thing was, Dr. Hollis was shared with us, or shared with me at least, that I guess the LA Fed and some of the governmental entities around there did kind of co-sponsored research.
Yeah, so the way that...
Is there an opportunity to do something like
Our
that?
community development group does some work like that, where there's two pieces to it. One, it's really important to me that you guys have the right information and the right data to make decisions, because I know how hard it is to make decisions without accurate information. So to the extent that we can be helpful providing you with that information all the time, I've told Gerard, just ask. We have a lot of other data sets that we pay a lot of money for, that we have contracts with vendors as to what we can and can't do with them. A lot of times, the interesting questions will show up, so what we'll do is we'll write our own reports, publish them on our website. People can then cite them how they will. The most important thing from the Fed standpoint is keeping independence and credibility. So it's very important that where we do provide assistance, it's not construed as an endorsement of the policy pieces. So that's kind of where we kind of draw the line. That being said, there is one kind of additional part to this, which is we have a staff of 25 economists in our department. They do academic work for peer-reviewed journals. If they publish peer-reviewed work and it has findings that are relevant, there are often like policy recommendations, proposals in there, but they're really founded on the academic foundations of the work.
One last question then. As far as the density issue, have you all done a study, and I don't want you to elaborate on it because we got lots of other people here, but by artificially creating density through state policies, for example, what's happened in Portland, where you create growth corridors by restricting.
Yeah, there's a lot of research papers that I've read on the topic. I'm happy to share those with people if they're interested. Yeah.
All right, well, let's go through the committee. Alderman Kennedy, you have any questions?
I do. Just one. Thank you for the review.
Absolutely,
yeah. You're showing the, African-American population north, primarily north, but you're showing here also some areas south.
Yeah.
Is there a trend towards the increase of that, or what is the trend there?
So are you looking at...
where it says share population non-white?
Okay, so yeah, so it's non-white, first of all. So I think what you're probably getting in some parts of South City are other races in the population.
That are non-white.
Hispanic non-white populations, things like that, that'll show up in the south part of the city.
Is there a trend to the increase of that population south?
Based on the map that I'm looking at, it looks like there's one census tract pretty far down south that's seen increases, but otherwise generally it seems like there's been decreases. And that's consistent with kind of, so one of the things that I do at the Fed, in addition to this data stuff, is we talk to businesses and all around our area because the data, as you can see here, is pretty far lagged. So it's lagged, as in like we have 2015, 16 numbers. So I would tell you from talking to development people throughout kind of South City and stuff, they are seeing a lot of kind of gentrification taking place in some of these neighborhoods. Where I've talked to one developer the other day that was telling me that some old lady a couple houses down just came over and said, like, how much do you want to sell my house for? Or how much will you buy it for? Because she's like, I just don't like my neighbors anymore. So anecdotally speaking, I think these numbers are lagged, but I do think that what I'm seeing from talking to people is that we are seeing some pretty big changes in certain areas. Housing prices in Shaw and Tower Row Park are up about 14% year over year in the last couple of years. So that, I mean, that's significant in those areas.
So. Thank you. That's all.
Alderman Boyd?
Sure. Again, thank you for your presentation, Charles. You know, the Office of Management and Budget on a federal level, they look at policies and they look at indications of how much it would cost, you know, to implement, right? So does the Federal Reserve do similar things like that? Analyze local policies or state policies to kind of...
Yeah. So it depends on the bank. So this is where like the regional structure of the system is very kind of interesting. So you have the Board of Governors in DC that pretty much focuses on monetary policy. Every one of the 12 different reserve banks has its own board of directors, its own bank president who decides what they're going to focus their efforts and research on. So that's 12 different entities doing it. I know of certain reserve banks that have spent time looking at some of those issues. It's not one that our bank spends a lot of time on, but I know that Atlanta Fed and the Minneapolis Fed, those reserve banks do a lot, and they on a national level, not just on their regional district.
Really?
Yeah. So we have 1,200 employees across the whole system. You're talking 30,000 almost.
So we could ask the Federal Reserve in another district
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
region to...
You can tell me, and I could point you to the right person. Yeah. I mean, they have studies, they have data sets that are available that look at.
I'm just kind of curious, you know, I know sometimes legislation have unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if we've had policies that have had negative impacts in the past and that we not continue that. And we're here today kind of sort of because of the whole incentive programs. Have you guys looked at the incentive programs?
I personally have not. I know that many of my colleagues in the system have.
Have there been any papers produced from?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Most of them are free and publicly available, so.
Of our specific incentive programs?
I think the papers that I'm thinking about have looked nationally within regions. I know a few of them have highlighted St. Louis as a metro area. I don't know if it's focused on the city specifically. So I'd have to look. So there's been a huge increase in the number of these micro-level data sets that are just now kind of getting a lot of use. So that's where we're seeing a lot of this work done. So it's kind of a really new piece to it, just because the data was never easily accessible. I mean, you guys were talking about earlier when I was sitting here, is that like stuff's just not online easy to pull down and streamline. So that's just starting to happen. So a lot of this stuff is very new, but it's a topic we hear a lot about.
You think if you ran across something, you could send it to Tom, who could send it to us, and she could kind of work with him on that? I really appreciate it. Thank you. No further questions.
Alderwoman Davis.
Oh, wow. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It brings a lot of necessary concerns that we should have, and understanding what it takes to sustain the city and grow it. It's more than just how I feel. One of the most important things, and you've highlighted those, and I will go even deeper when I look at all the indicators that are out there, but your secondary money market is a strong driver in economics, most especially when you're dealing with communities.
Yep.
we have probably not done the best job in the last 20 years on using those indicators to make decisions. And so hopefully, as we continue to move forward on this realm of information gathering, we will do more of that. And I do know that there are some other agencies that are quasi-government that we can refer to. They're also nonprofit instead of you, the Federal Reserve, being the direct conduit for information. And so hopefully we can look at some of those entities and they can help us in our struggle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay? Thank you.
Alderman Kodar?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Ogilvy?
Don't have any questions.
Alderwoman Boyd?
Hello. I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you and thank our chair for thinking ahead, and this was a very enlightening presentation. The only question I ask, could they be bigger? It's hard to read this.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, I understand.
But yeah, but besides
Well, I
that-
have, I sent Gerard the slide deck. So I printed these to save paper. I printed 2 slides per page.
Okay.
He's got the whole slide deck, which every page is one. So, and it's a
Bigger.
PDF, so you can zoom in and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
but I think it was very interesting. It was a great learning experience, so you kind of helped me out a lot.
Absolutely. And like I mentioned before, if you guys have other questions, please, feel free to reach out. I'll make sure that you guys have all the contact information, and Gerard can pass it along.
Okay, thank you.
It's really important for us. I mean, if you think about the entire region, I mean, I think in a lot of ways the prosperity of the city is essential for overall growth for the region, because that's what frames out, people's perceptions of what St. Louis is. And a lot of the same challenges that we see in the city are the same challenges that we struggle with, and they're going to get even worse in other parts of the region. So.
Alderman Bosley, any questions?
No, sir. Just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. Definitely can tell you put some work into it. Thank you.
Alderman Oldenburg?
No, other than thanks, Charles, and I hope that we can kind of stay in touch between Gerard, myself, and the chairman, and what we present to this committee on how we triangulate towards the project we're working on.
Absolutely.
And we can use your data as well as your skills to help us. So thank you.
Any of the non-committee members have questions of Charles before we cut them loose? All right, Charles, I'm going to give you a history quiz. Why does Missouri have 2 Federal Reserve banks?
Politics. It's a short answer. It was
Chairman of the Congressional Finance Committee was.
And it is actually twofold. It was that, and then the economies of Kansas City and St. Louis at the time were very different. And so St. Louis was competing with Memphis for the Reserve Bank, but we were able to get it over Memphis, and Memphis was our branch
Champ
city.
Clark?
Yeah. So, yeah.
And what other, in addition to the Federal Reserve Act that was passed in 1913, what other major economic policy act was passed in the same year?
In 1913, I have no idea. Not at least.
IRS.
Oh, really? Okay. IRS.
IRS.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, guys.
Charles, thank you very much for the presentation. All right. We now have Alderwoman from the 20th, if you could step up. We are taking her resolution first because we continued it from the last meeting, and then from that we will immediately jump into, I think, by seniority, I guess, or we'll have to see what bills are in front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the HUD's committee. Today we have a resolution calling for state and federal investigation in some of the real estate dealings as it relates to Paul McKee and the Northside Regeneration. The City of St. Louis has a relationship with Paul McKee and Northside Regeneration. What guides that relationship is a series of redevelopment agreements that have been okayed by the Board of Aldermen. When major questions are raised, it is our responsibility as a board, a legislative body that okays these redevelopment agreements, it is our responsibility to call for appropriate action. As you know, we have been in dispute with Mr. McKee, as has the state of Missouri. And several things have come to light since we've passed the original redevelopment agreements, and at this time I'd like to pass out a couple of news articles that have been in the news recently. The first of which was reported on May 9th, 2018. This was related to a trial and some information that came out in the trial related to a challenge the city had with regards to property values that the city, of property that the city acquired by eminent domain. During this trial, an attorney representing the city of St. Louis's LCRA, Ryan Carmody, told the jury that the sale with McKee was not a sale at all. She argued that it was designed to trigger McKee's state disbursement of distressed area land assemblage tax credits, which is a now defunct state program that the McKee lawyers helped to write. With this tax credit, Paul McKee reaped over $40 million in tax credits. As you can see from the article, no money was said to have changed hands, and again, this was considered a sham real estate deal by the city's own lawyers. In that same article, it was reported that our own mayor, Mayor Cruson, expressed shock at these very serious allegations and has committed to thoroughly looking into taking action and investigating these claims internally. Of course, we have a situation where we have some of our own city employees are involved, and of course, the city of St. Louis, as we all know, is strapped for resources, et cetera, and I think for those reasons, it is incumbent upon us to call on our state and federal prosecutors to make sure that there were, in fact, no wrongdoings, and if there were, we should take appropriate action. The second story is a follow-on to this, which describes the state of Missouri's Department of Economic Development raising red flags, clawing back nearly $2 million in state tax credits for a comparable deal, a deal that was comparable to the first. This is really, quite frankly, very, very alarming. When you have real estate transactions that are being described by our own city lawyers as shams, it is incumbent upon us, the Board of Aldermen, the body that okays these real estate relationships with developers, to take appropriate action. The public is outraged. They are rightfully so, looking to the Board of Aldermen that approved these redevelopment agreements to take action. And that is what the resolution before you here today does. It's very simple. It just calls for the state and federal governments to look into these transactions and to ensure that if there is any wrongdoing that has taken place, that the appropriate authorities are involved and taking appropriate actions. As we know from one of these stories, I don't remember which one, the federal investigators have been somewhat involved, at least participating by way of showing up to some of these trial hearings. So this really is not asking for something that is apparently out of line with what's going on. But again, because the relationship between the city of St. Louis and Mr. McKee and Northside Regeneration is guided by the redevelopment agreements that we as a Board of Aldermen approve, it is really our responsibility to make sure that when there are very serious allegations, as reported here in the Post-Dispatch, that we take appropriate action to safeguard the public and reinstill trust in our body and our ability to do our due diligence when it comes to these sorts of dealings, and that we hold accountable folks that are not living up to the law. And with that, I'll take questions. I know the chairman stepped out. I know we do have some members of the general public that have been waiting very patiently for several hours to be able to just have a couple of minutes of your time.
So we do have a list of speakers, and it should be two lists. Do you have another list?
Just that one. For the pros and cons.
Yeah, I see a list for pros. Okay, fine. So we'll start at the beginning of the list. Matt Frederick.
Good morning. On the way over here this morning, I was thinking about a meeting that this committee had in April of 2015. Chairman Rohde requested of the mayor's office that someone from there would come down and clarify Jeff Rainford's role in Northside Regeneration, NGA, and Mayor Slay's office. At the time, there was an open question as to who Jeff Rainford was working for. The administration didn't send anybody down to this committee. Instead, they sent this committee a letter signed by Mary Ellen Ponder. Just prior to that HUD's meeting, it came out in the St. Louis Business Journal that Mayor Slay and Jeff Rainford knew of Paul McKee's financial problems, but kept that information from you guys before you voted for the TIF reappropriation. It was Chairman Rohde's opinion in that meeting that it would be an extraordinary step to subpoena a private citizen, which Jeff Rainford was at that time, and I think that was probably the prudent decision to make. I remember Antonio French at that meeting saying, it's important that we know who knew what and when. Okay, now let's fast forward to now, and it comes out that Paul McKee was engaging in fraudulent real estate transactions, probably tax fraud. And again, we have this question, who knew what when? And given the behavior of the mayor's office in 2015, you're not going to get answers from them. And I don't think you're going to want to subpoena them. So I think what you're going to need to do in order to be responsible in your oversight role is to pass this resolution out and then to pass it onto the floor and then turn over these very important oversight matters to state and federal authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick, did anybody have any questions on his statements? I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Frederick, as a citizen, based on just the news stories and the articles that were passed out in front of us, indicating that the Missouri Department of Economic Development is investigating this, I saw somewhere in one of these articles, it also talked about, what's the name of it? Where'd the other article go? But we have like a couple of entities that are investigating this other than us.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because that's what I was pretty clear on. You didn't think that we would get the appropriate informations. And so with all the other entities that are looking at this, including I understand the IRS might be getting involved, and some other federal entities are investigating. Does that make you feel more comfortable that we probably get to the bottom of it?
I think what would make me feel most comfortable as a citizen of St. Louis and as a taxpayer of St. Louis is if the Board of Aldermen lends its imprimatur to whatever kind of state or federal investigations of these Paul McKee matters. I think that it is part of the Board of Aldermen fulfilling its role as an oversight body as an institution, direct and request state and federal authorities explicitly to look into these matters.
So all of them that are currently looking into it, you want us to tell them what to do?
No, I don't want you to. I don't want you to tell them what to do, ma'am. I would think that it would be good for the Board of Aldermen as the oversight body that we elect to, as I said, lend its imprimatur, lend its endorsement to the efforts of state and federal authorities looking into these matters.
Okay, thank you very much. Nobody else has any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next on this list is Otis Williams.
And they are a piece of Northside Regeneration. And they still do it.
I think it's noon now, so good evening, good afternoon.
What I wanted to do was to comment on the resolution and indicate that while I'm very supportive of the investigation or the parameters for it, I have an issue, though, with two whereas clauses that are in there that specifically names me. And it erroneously says that I did something that that I did not have authority to do. And I think each of the board members received a memo from council that essentially says that, in fact, I acted under the authority of the boards that authorize these various things. And so I would ask the board to, if you do pass the resolution, that you do, in fact, modify or eliminate those two whereas clauses as they are erroneous and false. I'm available for questions if you have.
Any questions, Alderman Kennedy? Alderman Boyd, any questions?
No questions.
Alderwoman Davis?
I see here where it's stated in the resolution with your name here. And so you're saying that you
I
prefer
think what I
that
want to do is just make it clear that I don't do anything without board, in this case, the LCRA or PIEA or LRA board authorizing it to be done. So I don't willy-nilly sign documents, and so.
You don't have any authority to do that.
I do not.
That's why we have boards and commissions.
That's exactly right. And so to say that I acted without authority is, in fact, erroneous.
Okay. Well, I can agree with that part. That's pretty simple. We all know how our processes operate, and that would not be a clear statement. So I'm going to suggest it as well that we do remove that. Were you asked anything about, were you consulted about this resolution in any kind of way?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
But when I saw it, it was first presented a few weeks ago, and counsel for the agencies that I represent sent a memo to each of the board members, if I recall.
I saw that.
And to try and explain the fact that, in fact, there were board resolutions that authorized any action that I have taken.
I did see those, and that is part of process and procedure. So in order for us to, because you represent the agencies, but the agencies give the authority of action. You don't.
Right.
So I guess I understand that part of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Kotar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Otis, that third whereas clause jumped out at me as well, where it says that you lacked authority to enter into certain agreements. I don't disagree with the spirit of the resolution, that there should be investigations at the state, local, and federal level. So two questions for you, Otis. I guess, is beside the third whereas clause where it says that you lacked authority, blah, 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 it refers to the future assurances agreement and then an amendment. Those are existing agreements, though, aren't they?
They are existing agreements that were reviewed by the boards that I represent.
Okay, but so they were entered into, I guess that gets back to the second whereas clause. And that one, we could probably clean that up and say, you know, they were executed by the LCRA and the City of St. Louis and the LCRA Holdings Corp. And scratch out the part that is, I believe, where it says Otis Williams purportedly on behalf of, remove that. And then I don't really agree with the third whereas clause where we're making conclusory statements about whether or not you had authority. I think that's distracting from the purpose of this resolution calling for an investigation. So I would support an amendment to probably remove that third whereas clause and take the reference to you personally out of the second one.
Thank you.
Does that include your comments, Alderman? Okay. What I'd like to do is get through all the questions by committee members and then any other speakers, and then we'll come back and talk about the particulars. So then we have Alderman Ogilvie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I would tend to agree with Alderman Coder's comments. Question for Mr. Williams. What knowledge do you have right now that you can share about what different investigations are currently underway into either Paul McKee's relationship with the state, or Northside Regeneration's relationship with the state, or relationship with us locally?
Well, to be very careful, because there are a number of stakeholders that are working with us who are in fact moving ahead with review. And I guess what I would say is that most of the information that has been found that people are looking at was as a result of our involvement in trying to understand some of the transactions that we have been looking at. So in addition to our own counsel, which is essentially how we found some of the things that we are looking at, I think others like the state and other agencies that represent the state are looking further.
Okay. Did one or more of those investigations start because of the information in the trial related to the sale price of those properties acquired via eminent domain and the discovery that occurred during those trials on behalf of the city? Was that the genesis of some
Yes.
of? Okay. And is it accurate to say that the city councilor and SLDC and any other related agencies, LCRA, are cooperating fully with any investigation?
Fully. We are very cooperative with any and all who are looking for it.
Okay.
So I have no problem with the spirit of the resolution. As was commented, I just wanted to factually clear the air on the two whereas clauses that specifically mention my name.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bascon.
No questions for Otis Williams.
Alderman Oldenburg.
No questions.
You know what, I'm sorry. I do have one question. Are you familiar with the name Titan Fish 2 LLC?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
This is a little outside of the bounds of this, but for some of the other projects that we worked on that is in that area, I get confused on the legal relationship of those projects to Mr. McKee. So like the emergency room, the hospital, and
as you recall, he asked for activation of a portion of the TIF to support that. So that was another one that came before the board that the board did approve. I mean, I said the board, the committee, then subsequently the board approved.
So that project is still progressing then?
It has approval to do that, but nothing has happened as far as closing. There has not been any request for any activity, as I'm aware of, on that project.
Okay. Is there any non-committee members that, Alderwoman from the 20th?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Williams, if you could help us understand, LCRA, through the Future Assurances Agreement, sought to amend the original redevelopment agreement that the City of St. Louis entered into with Northside Regeneration. Am I correct?
Well, as you know, the future assurances agreements were essentially promulgated on the fact that we would come back to the Board of Aldermen at some future date to get an amended redevelopment agreement. And it's a function of time at that point of trying to get other things that are non-associated in most cases with the redevelopment to try and get some things done. So one of them was to try and get the NG itself. The other was another activity near Union Station. We were trying to get those activities approved such that we could move forward.
But the Future Assurances Agreement is a promise to essentially look into amending the redevelopment agreement.
Exactly, but it does not guarantee, it rests, the approval of that still rests with the Board of Aldermen.
According to a letter submitted to the Board of Aldermen by Northside Regeneration, they are of the conclusion that the Future Assurances Agreement did in fact amend it, and that the City of St. Louis is bound by it. So there is a conflict associated with the conclusion of that.
We obviously will sort that out and
Sure, but there are two sides of this. Northside Regeneration is of the opinion that that Future Assurances Agreement did in fact amend the redevelopment agreement, and our lawyers are saying otherwise. The question is something that the courts have to decide. And it is my assertion that if we are going to be, if LCRA is going to have the authority to amend or promise to amend or look into amend redevelopment agreements that we scrutinize down here, it sort of negates our function down here. And whether or not these agreements come before the Board of Aldermen or can just go through LCRA is a question that we as a body, as a city, need to fully understand and vet. And whether we handle that and remove that from this resolution and handle that as a separate issue, that's fine. But that is still a question that remains. And it is a question that is pertinent not only to this project, but all redevelopment agreements that we take the time to scrutinize and look at and approve down here.
And I would just comment that the Board of Aldermen is the ultimate body for passing redevelopment agreements, and if we are working to try and cause change to that, we ultimately have to come back to the board. So I think the check is already there in the sense that nothing happens without coming back to you as a body to get final approval.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other non-committee members or aldermen
Yes,
from
sir.
the third? Did you have questions?
Well, since we're right here, I did wanted to ask, as far as the Titanfish 2 LLC, do you know who owns that company?
I don't know exactly who owns it, but the person that we dealt with was a guy named Joe Campbell.
Joe Campbell. Are they at all still involved with the Northside Regeneration project?
No.
No,
Okay,
that lawsuit been over with.
good. Thank you.
The alderman from the 22nd.
Yeah, thank you, Otis. In reference to the future assurance agreement, is that kind of like a letter of intent?
It is kind of like a letter of intent. It's something that at some point we have to, you'd have to bring it to the table for actual approval. And so at some point an amended redevelopment agreement would have been fostered, and that agreement would have come back to the board for approval.
And when developers signs, that when they have letters of intent to do a development project, the person that signed it could always back out and it fall through, right?
Well, in this case, it is a little more than a letter of intent. It is saying that the LCRA as a body would work to try and get it amended, but ultimately it has to always come back to the Board of Aldermen. So the fact that the LCRA would do one thing does not mean that it would actually happen.
Right.
And that's the understanding.
So it's kind of a good faith.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to compare it to the letter of intent because I've been through those gymnastics where we've had a letter of intent from somebody and they decided not to execute a contract. So, I mean, we did our due diligence, but we did the TIF legislation, we did everything that was pretty much asked, but they didn't execute. So, thank you.
Okay. There are no other, Alderwoman from the 19th.
I just wanted to make sure that if we're going to do this, that we do it the right way. So because these investigations are already taking place, we're not necessarily asking for them to take place anymore because they're already taking place. So should we not reword this? Because I do know that I saw it wasn't fake news, but I saw that the Attorney General's office is investigating on behalf of the state, and that the United States Attorney's Office is involved. And just recently, someone said they had a statement that the IRS is also involved. So we're not asking these people to investigate. We're now supporting the investigations. I'm just wondering how.
I don't have, now, as far as how that is stated, I don't have a stake in that game.
I guess I'm really asking the chairman of the committee to help me on that, because I don't.
I guess this was, at the time of introduction, I do not believe.
At the time of introduction, that had already been announced as well.
Oh, had it been?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I know the alderman from the 7th is preparing an amendment for this so that that it'll be before us. I was going to get through all the speakers.
Okay, I'll wait and see what that says.
Well, he was going to do, I think, regarding the second and the third, whereas clauses. If, I don't think he dealt with present or past or future tense of the resolution. Could I ask that perhaps you confer with this, as we hear other speakers,
Yes,
perhaps
sir.
you can have a little offline discussion with the sponsor? I mean, I don't think,
Yeah, 'cause-
everyone here is in
yeah.
support of the intent of the
The
resolution.
intent, but I want us to word it right,
Right,
because
and-
these things are already taking place.
Okay, perhaps we can kind of work on getting, Taryn, we're getting the copy of the first amendment that's going to be proposed. I know if
Okay.
anybody else proposes an amendment. we would
Mr.
encourage you-
Chairman,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
I may, neither the state nor federal investigators have confirmed investigation, to my knowledge, at this point. So while we may have some indications that that's happening, there have been no confirmations of such investigations.
I don't think it's a problem asking them to do anything, so I'm not saying that we shouldn't.
And I agree with that. I'm just pointing out that there has been no confirmation that they have already begun.
Thank you. Okay, next, speaking in favor of, thank you, Executive Director Williams. Speaking in favor of the resolution is, forgive me if my eyes, Sheila, is it Kenton? Sheila Kenton?
Good morning. Sheila Rendon, R-E-N-D-O-N.
Oh, I'm sorry, apologize. You have to proceed,
Okay.
please.
I am a resident of the St. Louis Place neighborhood in Ward 3. I have spent nearly a decade watching my neighborhood be demolished brick by brick, and in some cases due to fire on Paul McKee's property. We, as a neighborhood, my neighbors and I, we requested an investigation as far back as 2008, prior to, excuse me, getting to this point where the city has multiple questions to answer, as well as the state. We asked that the Northside Regeneration project in its infancy be investigated, and I fully support the resolution. I believe that there were some discussions about amendments, but as I've read the resolution, I see that the city of St. Louis should request as many investigations as it takes in order to decide or discover what the financial impact has been on the city, definitely what the impact has been on the neighborhoods where Northside Regeneration lies. That would be St. Louis Place, Old North St. Louis, and Jefferson Vanderloo, as well as conduct a survey, census-type survey of those neighborhoods to discover and acknowledge what has been done to those communities. That's all.
Thank you. Any questions of, and forgive me, was it Ellie Linton, did you say?
Sheila
Okay.
Rendon,
Rendon with an R?
with an R.
Oh, okay, I apologize, Ms. Rendon. Any questions of Ms. Rendon? Alderman Kennedy? Alderman Boyd?
No questions.
Alderwoman Davis?
No questions.
Alderman Kotar,
No questions. Thanks for being here.
Alderman Ogilvy, Alderwoman Boyd,
No, thanks.
Alderman Bosley,
I just want to say thank you for coming. As a resident of the 3rd, I most certainly know how you have been affected coming from one place to the other. So most certainly appreciate the fight, and you are always around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Obenberg.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any other non-committee members? No questions. Our last signed-in speaker was Mr. Larry Chapman. Go ahead, Mr. Chapman.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi, my name is Larry Chapman, and I'm a resident of the 3rd Ward. I lived for 8 years in the 19th Ward, Jeff Vanderloo, and I've lived for the past 38 years in the 3rd Ward. It was the 5th Ward, and it was changed now to the 3rd Ward. So I'm very familiar with the community there. And I'll get right to the point. Going back to 2002, when this developer came into our community, there were representatives of the citizens, beginning in the mayor's office, who were cooperating and collaborating with Mr. McKee in his ventures into our community. This goes all the way back to John Steffen and Pyramid Construction, to our Alderwoman April Griffin, and to then Alderwoman Tamika Hubbard. And so the plans that have been carried out within the Northside Regeneration has been done with full knowledge of representatives of us through the mayor's office and through the LCRA. And the work that has been going on there has been done with collusion from some of our elected officials. I understand that some of the aldermen from the south side would not realize what's been going on in our community. Because this development has has wreaked such havoc and caused such harm with the contamination. I'm sure you're all aware now what's going on with the contamination at the school. With the way that families were bought out from their homes. I suppose you know that the LCRA, whoever conducted the buyouts from the homes of people living in the area, that long before the NGA made its decision to come to North St. Louis, representatives from our city were coming to our residents and telling them the NGA is coming here. This was before the NGA made its decision. So we had elderly and other residents who were being approached by LCRA's office, Ms. Costello, I think, who works for them, or whoever she works for, and others, telling citizens the NGA is coming here. There were aldermen who from our area of North City who were coming to people and telling them, even though the NGA had not made its decision, that the NGA is coming. If you do not sell now, you will not get as much for your home later. Yes. These are some of the kinds of corrupt tactics that were taking place in our community long before the NGA announced it. This is a scheme that was plotted and planned coming from a developer and the mayor's office and anyone in the city of St. Louis, our elected officials, who would cooperate with them. Some people did this unwittingly, cooperated with it. Others did it because they thought there might be some personal gain. But nonetheless, you know, it's all been done going back to 2002. There's no question there's corruption going on here. I thank any alderman who will put forth this resolution to demonstrate that as a city we are on the up and up, and we want to do things on the up and up, and we want to make sure that our citizens are protected. There is one thing I would like to add, if it's possible to add to the resolution or suggest, and that is part of the problem why we're in such a conundrum as we are as a city, you guys all are, with Paul McKee and with the Northside development is because this thing has been rushed down our throats. The plan was for Paul McKee to purchase up the property so that it could be turned over for some kind of a development. When Paul McKee was unable to perform, and when he was unable to acquire all the property that he was supposed to acquire, then the city of St. Louis had to step in and exercise eminent domain, which is what they were trying to avoid at all costs. So then the city had to come in and exercise eminent domain to acquire those properties. And everything has been done in such a rush that families have been mistreated, children are now being contaminated, and until this investigation is completely carried out, we are an eyesore of the country. Three more quick points. We started off with a presentation from the Board of Education, the school board. If the NGA comes to that site, we will get absolutely no property tax which supports our schools. We have just now planned a 100-acre development where we are going to spend $130 million to give to the federal government land that takes it off of our tax rolls in perpetuity. And so not only is the whole thing is just an ill-conceived concept, and so that is the one thing. The other thing is if this is the Urban Development or Housing Development Committee, and we're looking after the best interest. No one has seen any real financials. How much money is being spent on this fiasco? Northside Regeneration. How much is the city spending to bring the NGA here? What is it actually costing us? The $38 million that they keep talking about that we're going to get back each year in earnings taxes is now up in question. It'll be tied up in the courts with McKee. And not only that, every 5 years we have to vote on whether or not we're even going to keep the earnings tax. So any 5-year period could pass, and we could decide to do away with the earnings tax, and all that money, the only money coming from the whole NJAA effort, after spending over $130 million, is down the tubes. So I would like to suggest definitely this investigation. I thank you for that, but I would also like to add to it, I think that we need to contact the U.S. Attorney's Office and request that an immediate injunction be placed, that a cease and desist order be given to the people that are doing the work on the site for the NGA, because this is only going to create a further of a fiasco. This is going to make the colossal failures of Pruitt and Igo and other, the stadiums and all that, look like a drop in the bucket. The responsible thing to do is to stop work on that site until this investigation can be done, allow for the planning of a proper urban development for the North St. Louis City site, and move forward from that. And I thank you for hearing me out and taking the time today. Thank you. We won't have time to go into it now, but I am available. I've been watching this for 20 years. I've been in the community for 50 years. There is no oversight. They say that the Missouri Department of Natural Resources is giving oversight on this contamination. We watched all the contaminated soil be trucked through our community with a canvas tarp over the backs of these trucks while the dust blew throughout the neighborhood. This was the same earth that the archaeologists who were sent out there, the very first people who were sent to the site were archaeologists who were to look for artifacts. First, they told us they weren't looking for any African-American artifacts because we have African-Americans around. We can get their artifacts. They were going back. This is what the guy told me personally. They were trying to find the artifacts that took place when the European settlers came. So this was like the late 1800s into the 1930s. So they wanted to see what was there for that. Well, what about the prehistoric or the Native American remains? They weren't interested in those either. They would have to go deeper in order to reach those. Well, what about the fact that where Howard Branch School sat was one of the oldest African-American settlements in North City? Well, they couldn't examine that site because that site was contaminated. So we were told that they could not examine certain sites within the NGA footprint because they couldn't disturb the soil. It was contaminated. But when Colby or whoever the contractor came out to remove the soil, the dust was flying everywhere. The bulldozers were digging, no problem with these workers being exposed to the contamination, but the archaeologists were not. I mean, I can go down, I would happy to talk with anybody. There is documentation a mile long on this stuff. We just haven't been able to get anybody to listen to us. Thankfully, now we have an alderman. Thankfully, now we have an alderman who will at least, give us some consideration and work with his constituents. Thanks again for your time. I know I've taken way too much time. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Chapman? Alderman Boyd?
Thank you for being here, Mr. Chapman. No questions.
Alderwoman Davis?
No questions.
Alderman Kotar?
No questions.
Alderman Ogilvy?
I don't have any questions.
Alderwoman Boyd?
Thank you for being here, and I hear the passion in your voice, and I really hope that we get this corrected to help the residents in that area.
Thank you. Alderman Bosley?
Thank you, Mr. Chapman.
Alderman Odenberg?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chapman, for coming down and sharing. Okay, we've had all the speakers now. I know that there was a proposal for an amendment. We should probably formalize that. So let's see, we do have the resolutions before us. So at this point, Alderman from the 7th, did you want to offer that as an amendment?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. In line with my previous comments, I move to amend Resolution 19 as follows. Copy has been placed on all your desks. Simply in the second whereas clause to remove Otis Williams purportedly on behalf of the, which should then make that sentence, that whereas clause, I guess, consistent, and there's a typo in there as well. Executed by the LCRA of the City of St. Louis, LCRA Holdings, blah, blah, blah. And then the second part of the amendment would just be to remove the third whereas clause in its entirety.
So if that is a motion, is there a second for that motion?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that or comments? Alderman Kennedy, any comments? Alderman, actually, perhaps we should provide the sponsor. Did you, Alderwoman, did you have any comments on the resolution?
I don't have any I made my comments earlier. I do think that this is a question that this board should, and this committee should consider, the authority of LCRA as it relates to amending redevelopments, promising to amend them, et cetera, and we should look into that perhaps in a separate matter. I do appreciate the committee's willingness to make amendments that align the committee's support of the spirit of the resolution.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Any other comments on the resolution? Alderman Boyd, do you have any comments?
No comments.
Alderwoman Davis?
No comments.
Alderman Kotar?
No comment.
Alderman Ogilvy, any comments?
I would just say that I agree with Alderwoman Spencer that I think the amendment is good and it keeps the resolution on a single topic, but I think there's still an open question on how redevelopment agreements are happened or are changed or extended after we approve them. It's something that has not been looked at with hardly at all, I think, and I think we're learning some things this year that we didn't know about. So I think it's worth this committee taking a look at that subject in a separate venue, I think. Those are my only comments.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderwoman Boyd.
I have a question. I could have sworn I heard someone say the first two whereases were going to be amended, and I see the one about the future assurances, but the other one, Otis Williams, and the first one, I didn't see that one, so are we leaving that one in?
Well, second and third.
The amendment addresses both. I mean, so unlike a board bill, there's no line numbers, so I just did this as one amendment. You'll see the amendment says in the second whereas clause and then says in the third whereas clause, so it addresses both.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman Bosley, any questions
No, sir.
or comments? Alderman Oldenburg? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Having no other discussion, Mr. Clerk, would you call the vote?
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Davis. Alderman Kotar.
Aye.
Alderman Ogilvy. Ogilvy. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Chairman Rhodey.
Aye.
We have 6.
Okay, so that was for the amendment. So at this point, we'll go ahead and
Oh,
now.
did I-
Sorry,
you
Mr.
didn't-
Chairman.
I was doing something. Aye for the amendment.
Can we
Sorry.
get that count again?
Sure. Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd. Alderman Davis just made a motion to add her to the list, so it'll be a 7.
Okay.
There's
Count.
8 members. 1, 2,
Still, we missed
5,
somebody.
6, 7, 8.
Kennedy walked out. He's not here.
Am I carrying earlier?
1, 2,
5,
3.
6, 7, 8.
They call Coda. Spencer's
He's
not
not a
on this
member of
list.
the committee,
Oh,
though.
okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, there should be 8 people, so.
I have a list with, I didn't count you, so.
No, we
8
had
total.
a little confusion down
Sorry.
Okay.
So there are 8.
You good?
We have
Thank you.
8 yes votes for the amendment. Now we would like to take up the resolution as amended. If someone could make that motion.
I move we approve I move we recommend Resolution 19 as amended to the full Board of Aldermen.
Second.
It was moved by the alderman from the 24th. Who seconded it?
Second.
It was seconded by the
16th.
alderman from the 16th. It was a request for previous roll. There's no objection, so we'll consider that passed out of committee with a do pass recommendation with 8 affirmative votes. Okay, now we are, thank you everyone who came down for that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting on task here and I'm getting a little, let's see. Now we have a number of these resolutions before us. Is that right? We have 3 resolutions and then we have a board bill. Is that right?
Resolution 8.
Let's take up the first of the resolutions is the alderman from the 10th. I cannot believe he has been so patiently waiting with us. I believe I had emailed you last night and I warned you of this, alderman, but we appreciate your patience.
Could have brought lunch and then we'd all be okay.
Well, problem is I got here during breakfast time. My kitchen doesn't open until 10:30, sorry. Anyhow, thank you for everyone for being here. We're talking about resolution number 50, which is 5130 Northrup Avenue. I will give the handouts to the lovely Vanna White here. That's my lovely assistant.
Is it number 9? Is that right?
It says 50 on my thing that the SLDC gave me, but is it number 9 on your sheets?
I don't know nothing no more. This is a bit too long.
9, okay.
It's number 9?
We'll have to beat Zach up on that one. All right, Zach says he made the mistake. It's number 9. Number 9? Number 9? 5130 Northrup Avenue. This is north of Highway 44 in the Hill neighborhood. The developer, St. Louis Properties LLC, also known as Chocolate. They have their manufacturing and distribution plant currently down the street from here. They are buying this 22,000 plus square foot building at $860,000 and planning on putting $100,000 more so into it for a new warehouse and distribution center, allowing them to open up more production in their current facility. They're planning adding up to 15 or more new employees. So apparently they're going to be chocolate. But they've been doing very well over there. This is in an enterprise zone, the enhanced enterprise zone, and it qualifies for abatement. We have the approval from SLDC for 10 years of abatement at 80%. I'll be open to any questions.
We, just so everybody's on the same page, we're having this to fulfill an advertised hearing. We're going to hold it in committee because we're trying to create some sort of resolution of all this tax abatement and so forth, and we're getting, I think, fairly, well, actually, we've had a couple setbacks, but it's becoming a front burner issue. But at this point, why don't we go ahead and, are we doing we don't do a financial analysis if it's less than $1 million, do we?
I don't believe so. And
Yeah. Do you have one, Zach, or?
The impact statement for projects under $1 million, but
And when they're
John
in the
has
easy
not addressed
zone,
it.
they automatically qualify.
So there is an impact statement on the back of it. Okay, let's go through the committee and see if there's any questions. Alderman Boyd, any questions?
Not at this time, thank you.
Alderwoman Davis.
No questions.
Alderman Kotar. No questions. Alderman Ogilvy.
A general comment about these EEZ zone tax abatements is, I mean, I think we're not, my sense with these is that we're not giving them as much scrutiny as we give everything else. So are we going to include some of these in our future analysis? I understand, I mean, this one, I by no means mean to pick on Alderman Vollmer here, or on the fine people at the chocolate company who make a delicious product. If this were not in the EEZ, this would probably not qualify for any tax abatement.
if it wasn't in the, I probably wouldn't be presenting it to you. The fact that the enterprise zone is set up is why I'm standing here.
Right.
Yes.
It's just that
That's the purpose of the enterprise zone, is to facilitate when there's commercial, people who are adding jobs and things to the city.
Right. Right. But my general comment is that this level of investment would not qualify for tax abatement. And here it does. It wouldn't qualify based on our own standards, I think.
No, then I would have turned them down.
Right.
And I wouldn't have wasted time.
So I just think the fact that the state says we can do it doesn't mean that we always have to do this. Or we have to do it at 100% or 80%, et cetera, et cetera. So
would you, I believe Mr. Ruthest would like to address something if you'd like to recognize him?
Sure.
Okay.
No, the fact that it's an enhanced enterprise zone doesn't change the scrutiny that we put on the project. So the only difference is that it's already been found to be in the enterprise zone, and therefore the entire zone is found to be blighted. But so that aspect is different. But other than that, we would look for the same scrutiny in terms of tax abatement on this project, whether it was a Chapter 99 project or whether it was an enhanced enterprise zone project.
So we would? I mean, something with an acquisition of $860,000 where there was only $100,000 of investment of the property would qualify for tax abatement?
It's also a job creator, so I think that is the reason why we feel tax abatement is warranted, not necessarily because of the amount of money being invested. The fact that they're spending $800,000 means that the amount of tax abatement they're going to get is very, very small, because the amount of the assessed value is going to go up very, very little because of the $100,000 they're expending. So the city is not really giving much away at all here, because the tax abatement is going to be very, very small.
Right, I agree with that. I mean, that's a fair point. I would just maintain that I think it would be less likely to qualify if it were not in the EEZ. So that's fine. Thank you. We can move on.
Okay. Alderwoman Boyd, excuse me.
No question.
Alderman Bosley?
No questions.
Alderman Oldenburg?
No questions.
Okay. Hearing no other questions, we're going to go ahead. We've heard I guess we're supposed to see if there's anybody wanting to testify on this. There is no one signed up to testify.
Everybody likes chocolate here.
I'm sorry?
Everybody likes chocolate here,
Everybody
okay.
likes chocolate. So we will consider resolution, what was that, 9?
Nine.
As officially heard,
All right.
and we will be back as soon as we get this worked out with SLDC, and if we need to, we'll call a special meeting and get this out as fast as possible.
I
Thank you
appreciate
very
your
much
time.
for
It was lovely spending the morning with all you folks.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you for your patience today, Alderman. I had also contacted Alderwoman Martin last evening as well, and she had a obligation. I know she came down briefly earlier, but I advised her that we would have someone from SLDC take up her resolutions for her. So,
I can give it to Alderman. She called me and asked me if Alderman needs to introduce it.
And there's no testimony.
there is no testimony for either of those. So we'll go ahead and start off with resolution number 8.
9 or 38?
38.
8 and 38.
There's an 8.
Okay, so we'll do these one at a time. Good morning. This is a Resolution 8, which I think is in front of you, along with the packet. If everyone has it, with his 8001 Van Buren Street. This is also an enterprise or enhanced enterprise zone project seeking 10 years at 90% tax abatement. This particular project I know is on South Broadway, and I think it is appended to a larger series. I'll let SLDC, if you have questions on it, sort of larger series or chain of events of development that's happening with 1031 exchanges, et cetera. But the Resolution 8 in front of you seeks 10 years at 90%, basically for an existing business to expand and enhance their mill processing facility. Talgrani Elevator Company that is located will be down there, will be purchasing and demolishing a building to do a new 30,000 square foot facility. We'll entertain any questions, or if there's any questions for SLDC, happy to take those as well.
So they're clearing the site, and they're going to invest $2 million in
Correct.
construction.
Yep.
Okay. Any questions? Alderman Boyd?
No questions.
Alderwoman Davis?
No questions.
Alderman Kotar?
No questions.
Alderman Ogilvy?
No questions.
Alderwoman Boyd?
You said, what did you say this was?
It's a mill processing facility, grain mill processing facility, correct?
That was resolution what?
8.
Number 8.
Because I have 38 and I have 51.
So I think on the packet, it says 51, and it should be 8, but the actual resolution itself is 8.
Thank you. 'Cause I was
That's
like,
Or it does say 8, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Terrence.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. No questions, I'm sorry.
Alderman Bosley?
No questions.
Okay, hearing no questions, there was no speakers, we will consider this Resolution 8 heard for the purposes of the advertisement that we purchased. And then our last one is Resolution number 38.
Correct.
Alderman, do you want to proceed on that? And there are
Certainly.
others?
So Resolution 38, again, I said these were sort of appended projects. The owner at 201 East Steins Street is an Apex Metal, which is a metal finishing facility, also located very in close proximity to the project you just heard on. And in fact, they had sold that parcel to the mill company, Talgrani, in a 1031 exchange again. And this is a project that they are able to expand with the proceeds they received from that sale to expand their facilities as well in the same area. And they are producing, I think they're going to renovate an existing building also near their site at this address and do 25,000 square feet facility to continue and improve, expand their metal finishing production facility. Also an EEZ project seeking 10 years at 90% based on recommendations from SLDC.
Okay, there was no one signed up to speak on behalf of this, so we'll go through again one last time. Alderman Kennedy, Alderman Boyd.
Yes, and is there a community benefit agreement associated with this?
Alderman, not to my knowledge, but that's a darn good question.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Davis.
No questions.
Alderman Kotar.
No questions.
Alderman Ogilvy.
No questions.
Alderwoman Boyd.
I have a question. My question is, on the previous, they wanted 80% tax abatement. This one wanted 90%. So why is it higher?
I think they're both 90%, Alderwoman.
No,
No?
I mean, on the chocolate people, they wanted 80. And then this one wanted 90. So what's the difference?
Those were the recommendations that came from SLDC, so I think I'd maybe defer to those folks.
We looked at the area and how much it needed it. South Broadway is an area that needs investment, so that's why we gave 90% on these last two projects.
So is this an enterprise zone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And how many jobs would this create?
At least 2. And we're keeping a city business located in the city. So they were looking at other locations besides this location.
So this is 2 jobs?
Correct.
Okay, and the other one was 15 jobs?
For chocolate. We're also retaining at least 20 to 30 jobs, but they'll create 2 additional jobs on top of that for Apex Metal.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry. I just stopped on it, didn't I? I'm sorry.
Alderman Bascon, and we want to circle back and provide the alderman from the 22nd.
Yeah, you mentioned 2 jobs, but the resolution says 3.
I apologize.
It is 3 jobs, right?
At least 3, above 2. 2 is the lowest we can go with enterprise zone, so.
So we might, I mean, we can probably fix that in the resolution. We're just here.
I mean, I just wanted to point out, it says 3. I mean, it could say 13. I don't think it'd make a big difference, but you're on the record for saying 2. The documentation beats conversation. It says 3. Okay.
Got it.
Just wanted to point that out.
Okay, we will consider that heard for legal purposes or publication purposes. We have one last bill here to hear, and that's from the alderman from the 7th. Mr. Ferry, are you sticking around for this last bill? Or if not, could you stick around anyway, because I'd like to visit with you when we're. I'm sorry,
It's 2 left.
Oh, we have 2 bills. Okay, well, I'm just asking you to stick around. I wanted to visit with you after the meeting. I think we'll be done here in a few minutes.
Kept me here too long. I feel like I need this.
Which bill is that? I got. Could I get one too?
Mr. Chairman, can I start with Board Bill 85, which is a tax abatement bill?
Sure.
Okay.
And we will be holding this in.
That's fine. Handout's being passed out to you all right now. Board Bill 85 is to authorize a 10-year abatement at 90% for the Whitty building, which is down on the landing. I don't know what business used to be in there. As you are all familiar, the landing's had its struggles in recent years and is in the midst of a bit of a resurgence. We've got some residential projects going on. We've got a number of rehabs of commercial buildings happening down there. We're going to have new residents there sometime this fall, and then I know there's a second residential building in its planning phases. This is a building owned by Drury Development. The Whitty building, it's a very old building from 1849. It is, if you look at the handout on the fact sheet, just to give you an idea of where we're talking about, it's that bolded area. It's a commercial building, so this will be first floor commercial storefronts and then new office space up top. And this is actually part of a larger sort of deal we're working on with the Drurys. The Drurys also own, immediately on Exhibit C of the fact sheet, also own the parking lot, the surface parking lot immediately to the south of this building, where Lucas Avenue no longer goes through. We are finally getting a resolution to this issue. It's something I've been working on for almost 3 years, along with SLDC and some other stakeholders on the landing, to reopen Lucas Avenue. It was vacated I don't know when, a long time ago, before the Drurys even acquired this parking lot, Lucas was vacated. This is a perfect example for why we should be very, very careful when we vacate public right-of-way. This street was vacated way back in the day. No one thought it was necessary. And then with the arch grounds, they've reconfigured access to the landing. They've closed off Washington Avenue and made it more difficult to get down there. And one of the big issues we're having is simply access to the area. So we're going to reopen Lucas Avenue. There's some state money secured to help with the reconstruction of that street. The Drurys are also making some investments in this building that they own, and we hope to see future investments on some of their surface parking lots there. But so this would basically just be a 10-year, 90% abatement. I know Jonathan's done some analysis on this as well. It's about $2.8 million worth of, and your fact sheet incorrectly says 2.3. It's actually 2.8, and Jonathan's analysis reflects that. So I would like to get this passed. I understand we're not going to pass it today. That's fine. But in the not too distant future, this was a lot of negotiation over many years to get to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. There were no speakers signed up. Questions? Alderman Boyd?
No questions.
Alderwoman Davis?
No questions, just glad to see the resurgence of, we put a lot of time in creating Leclerc's Landing years ago, so it's good to see it coming back.
Yes, thank you.
Alderman Ogilvie?
So reopening or rebuilding Lucas is a good thing, and thank you for working on that. Just a note for posterity that when I went to the mayor's office in 2012 and told them that closing Washington Avenue was a terrible idea, they told me I didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And now here we are, 6 years later.
Opening
and
another
everybody agrees that it was a bad idea.
Yeah, that was before my time. These plans for the new improved arch grounds.
I'm not blaming.
I know it was just crazy. I don't know what they were thinking.
I'm not blaming you. But it does speak to the idea that closing streets can lead to a lot of problems, and it can be very hard to fix those problems, actually, and can cost a lot of money. So we should always use caution when we do that. Outside of that, good luck with the development.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd?
No questions.
Alderman Bosley? Alderman Oldenburg?
Just real quick, did you say, do they have any prospective tenants that you know of that might be in that office
I'm
space?
looking to SLDC on that. Do we have prospective tenants for the Whitty building?
I toured it last week. They do have different ones. IT company has half of the floor. It's really good space. It looks good. It's they've kept a lot of the original lumber company stuff in it. I don't know if you're going through it.
Great, thank you. No more further questions.
Okay, we'll consider that board bill heard for purposes of meeting our obligation for public. Oh, we do have speakers for this. So.
Well, no, not this one. This is the next.
This is the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll consider that heard then. Then we go to the next board bill, which is, Board Bill number 24.
Board Bill 24. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board Bill 24 is a reprisal of a board bill that I introduced at the end of last session. We had a public discussion on it, and at the time said, hey, we'll be bringing it back, discuss it some more, and hopefully get this project moving along. Basically, this is a board bill to require folks getting incentives, whether state or local incentives, here from the Board of Aldermen that are located within the footprint of the existing steam loop, which is owned by the city and operated by Ashley Energy, to basically require them, if they're rehabbing buildings, to utilize this city asset, the steam loop. You may remember we had, I believe, Rich Bradley was, I don't remember if Mike Garvin was here, who are members of the SWMDC, the Solid Waste Management Development Corp., which is the I guess, entity that oversees the steam loop and its rates and everything else. It's sort of a quasi-governmental agency. They were here testifying in favor of this last time. It should basically require, if you're getting incentive, municipal finance incentives, which are defined on page 3 as any form of public financing or incentive offered through the city, SLDC, or any city agency, blah, 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 or the state of Missouri, to use the steam loop for 10 years. we've got a vested interest, which I think you've all heard about last time, and I know a number of you have toured the facility as well since then with Mason Miller, who's here today, who's the head of Ashley Energy, and his counsel, Mr. Sweeney. The viability and the survival of the system is really important for the city. So at some point, there's got to be a trade-off. Folks want incentives from this board and from the city. There might have to be some concessions on this. I realize this isn't going to make everybody happy, and believe me, I've heard from some developers who aren't necessarily thrilled about this, but, we need this thing to survive. If it were to fall into financial disarray, we'd certainly be in trouble. We've got a lot of buildings, and all of our city buildings in downtown footprint are on this system. The capital costs of adding boilers and new heating systems to all these buildings would be just astronomical for the city. So this is important for us. I've got Masons here and Dave Sweeney if they want to make any comments. Or if anyone has any questions for them, I'll probably defer to them. This is somewhat technical.
We actually have a Mason Miller signed up to speak, so I guess we can go through the committee and see if there's any issues that came up. Alderman Boyd, do you have any questions?
Yeah, Alderman, this PACE program, is this the program that was moving through the Intergovernmental Affairs Committee?
So there's an existing PACE program, and one of the things we probably are going to clarify, we've been talking to some of the PACE folks who help with the financing of those deals, is, look, we want to encourage people to use PACE. We want to encourage people to borrow money at low interest and make energy improvements. What we don't want to be doing is, the city PACE board is using PACE financing to, and I believe the PACE commission's already passed a similar resolution through their board. We don't want to be using PACE financing to be encouraging people to leave the steam loop. So right now, if you want to do other energy efficiencies and use PACE money for that, whether you're adding solar or whatever insulation you're fixing, that's all well and good. But we're not going to allow folks to use PACE financing to basically, put in a new boiler system and get off the steam loop.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman Davis.
No questions.
Alderman Ogilvie?
Yep. So if a building is on the steam loop and it gets an incentive, it's required to stay on the steam loop for
10 years.
Not less than 10 years past the period of the incentive. I think
Correct.
Okay. If a building is not on the steam loop, what happens then?
So if it's not on the steam loop.
But it's in this downtown area.
Yes. So, and they're getting city incentives would require the use of the steam loop. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mason, if there's costs associated with hooking the building up to the steam loop, do you guys cover that?
That's right. We absorb.
Come on up.
Mason Miller, I'm the president, Ashley. We pay the cost to hook the building to the steam loop, which we do now anyway, for any building that joins the steam loop. They carry the cost from the internal ductwork, but they would have all of that stuff anyway, regardless of if they're on boilers or anything else.
Okay. I mean, so the assumption is all these buildings are on steam heat, whether it's via a boiler system in the building or via the steam loop, right?
Correct.
What if a building...
any of these big buildings, if they chose to use some other, for a large, downtown building, what other heating options are available?
You could do electricity. I think the only building I know of that's on all-electric heat, because of the cost is astronomical these days. When they built, is it Met Center is the name of the building?
Met Square.
Met Square. They built it as an all-electric building. Can't be retrofitted to steam. That's actually why it's a hard building to market from a property standpoint, is because now electricity to heat a building is a very inefficient, uneconomic issue. And none of the developers down here are doing electric heat. It just doesn't happen.
So the buildings within this area, all of them, or close to all of them, have the capacity to be on?
Yes, and we've defined the areas. Where is that? I think it's on page 2. We've defined it's the downtown district.
Right. They've just got the infrastructure inside the building to...
Yeah, the steam loop's either already going there or extremely close by.
No, I mean inside the building. They've got like a radiator system that just,
Yes.
They technically, these days, they use a heat exchanger, which essentially puts the equivalent of what you're picturing, kind of the radiator with the knob in my apartment in college had.
Well, my house has that now, so yes.
So that is now in the basement in a centralized facility, whether you have a boiler or otherwise, and then it uses a heat exchanger like, just like a Northside system.
Okay,
But
okay.
it's the same.
So they may have, okay, they've got like
They either have a boiler.
the steam loop heats up the air, and then there's a forced air system that blows it around.
Either
Okay.
they have a boiler and
Got
they
it.
create steam and heat the building, or you connect to our steam loop and you don't have to put your own boiler.
Okay. Okay, so this is an ordinance, and if you were an alderman and somebody else tried to pass a redevelopment ordinance that had an incentive that gave an incentive to one of these buildings and they weren't on the steam loop, our city attorneys would enforce that, or the mayor?
Yeah, I mean, it would be up to the, the city to enforce, but yes. And I mean, our deputy city councilor's on the SWMDC. Is he on the committee, or is he just the counsel for it? Garvin?
Garvin is the council.
He's counsel. So Mr. Garvin's extremely familiar with this, and with not only the bill, but this concept. And so, yeah, I mean, it will fall on, the city development agencies and everything to enforce this, because, I mean, I don't think we're going to start looking at, heating plans for large-scale developments downtown as part of our work here at the Board of Aldermen.
All right. And then this section 4 part, the 5% of the net profit, explain how that works.
Yeah, so section 4, sorry. Yeah, so basically we put it into a fund. There's an existing fund for maintenance of the pipes, because we own the pipes. We'd like to grow that fund for, future growth of the system and for just basic repairs. I mean, it's almost annually where we see on the news there's some issue with, a manhole cover blows and there's steam shooting through the air, in the streets of downtown, or someone's getting burned on one of these manhole covers. We've had a number of those kinds of issues, but so do basically for the maintenance of the system, which is owned by the city.
Okay, so is this for new building? So this says, like, if a new building comes on and the steam loop charges them $100,000 a year or whatever, that 5,000 of that goes into a maintenance fund. Is that for new buildings coming onto the system, or is that for every building that's on the system?
I mean, as read, I believe it's for it would be from this resolution going forward for new buildings coming on that are receiving a subsidy.
Okay, 10-4, got it. Thank you, that's all.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt the order here because our executive director of SLDC asked to make a couple comments, although he didn't sign in, we'll still recognize him.
So when this was introduced last time, I may be the only person that had any objections to it. I'm supportive of the steam loop, and we need to maintain it. And I just think that mandating that every project essentially go on it is a disincentive for redevelopment, as it does not allow, for an analysis to see how we can make some of our redevelopment projects work downtown. We work very hard to try and get redevelopment to happen, and so to me, this is one of those where we have mandated that someone to use an option that may not necessarily pencil out. And so I understand the need, and we'll do whatever the board suggests, but one of the things that, and I'm counter to my fellow folks at BPS and the city council's office, only because I have to talk to the developers on a regular basis, and having this as one of those things that we still have to overcome. We have to overcome a lot of things, and this is just one more of those things that we will have to overcome. So, we have already on the PACE side, as already mentioned, we have indicated that if it's already on the steam loop, that we will not provide for granting or assisting with PACE if they have to stay on it. So they cannot essentially get off of the loop with the use of PACE. And so I think we are moving in that direction. And so what I'm suggesting is that there needs to be more review of this before we categorically move down this path. And so I looked at it as the bill was being very coercive, and So I said if there was going to be a mandate, that one of the things that we might look at is just an analysis of the, that compares the efficiency of the different utilities that, you know, a developer might have. Or we might look at some way to incentivize those folks to make the decision to be on it. And, you know, and I'm not sure what that is yet. It's just that I just don't want to, I just want to be on record as saying that this may be a detriment to redevelopment in the long run, particularly downtown.
If I could ask a real quick question of you. And I'm not an attorney, so I always have to defer. This is an ordinance that says that we need to do it, but this is not necessarily a lease agreement. Is that correct? So that if a development proposal came in and we thought that it was worthy of an exception, we could just go ahead and create an exception.
If there was leeway in the bill to allow for the exception, then that would be great. I mean, because really, I am supportive. I understand that there's got to be something done to cause this facility to continue in the city, because it has gone from 105, I think it's 105, down to like 70 users, because people have, you know, have categorically decided to make, call it the more efficient use decision. A little bit of that, and I've told Mason and his folks this as well, so this is not anything new. You know, before he took over, I mean, there were opportunities to sell some of the earlier developers on the system, but we missed that opportunity. And I always look at it as lack of marketing to make that work. And so I just want to be sure that we have full effort to market what our facility is, but also maybe provide maybe an incentive for people to also stay on it. But also, if it is passed, that there's a facility to allow for an exception to be made.
Why don't we, Alderman from the 7th, did you care to respond? You're the attorney, I'm not, so,
So
this is an ordinance, right? This isn't.
an ordinance,
Yeah,
right?
so
And I mean,
we
look,
don't have a lease.
there's, looking at it from what Otis has discussed, I mean, so from the developer's perspective, some of them are squawking at this based on the fact that currently, if you're doing a building downtown, you're likely getting historic tax credits, okay? So you can take your boiler costs or part of your capital expenditure, you can basically bake those costs. You can get off the loop, we're already incentivizing people getting off of it by allowing them to bake in those basement costs on your boiler system and your heating system. Those count towards your historic tax credit allocation, so you can get credits for those construction costs. You know, this is going to be a trade-off, and this is not going to make everybody happy, but frankly, we as a city are reliant on this thing. And its continued viability, and so that's why we're proposing this. I would say there's nothing really precluding us from, in future deals. I'll use the railway exchange, for example, because I know they're not happy about this. If that deal were to come to fruition, and if the only sticking point on a deal of the magnitude of the railway exchange building was this ordinance, there's nothing precluding us from in a future ordinance saying, you know, this doesn't apply to that particular development. I mean, we could put that into the redevelopment agreement. We have that ability to do just that. We'd pass a law for the redevelopment agreement, and we could, you know, exclude it. But I don't think if we create an exception that allows everyone to get around having to comply and be on the steam loop, I don't know that we've done much to advance our goal of making a sustainable and healthy system.
Let's kind of keep going through. I'm sure we'll circle back. And Alderwoman Boyd, did you have any questions?
Questions.
Alderman Bosley, any questions? Alderman Oldenburg, any questions?
No questions.
No questions. Okay, we'll circle back through. Alderman Boyd, any questions?
Yeah, Otis, in reference to your comments, so what would the exception look like in your mind?
Well, I'm very sensitive to what the Alderman just said, which is we don't want everybody to have an exception. All I want is the opportunity. He says that he thinks that we can do that by just including it in a new redevelopment plan for any particular project. I'm not sure that that is the case, but, you know, I just want it to be such that a person could make an argument for it in the future and not necessarily be automatic an exception.
So are you thinking more so if people are doing new development that's not already on the steam loop would be an exception, or people who are on the steam loop that want to do $1 million worth of upgrades would have an exception as well?
Well, we're fortunate that much of what we're doing, well, I guess we're fortunate that much of what we have done has been historic, and so much of that, most of that work has already been done. So the case of historics is probably few, but one of the few remaining historic buildings that's downtown is very large, and that's the May facility, and as well as the Jefferson Arms that I think has already been through, and so I think it may be grandfathered in, but May is yet to come, and it's one of those that it could tilt that situation one way or the other, and I think they need to be able to make an argument one way or the other as to whether it should be on and off. But it also is one of our major users of steam, and so I can understand the argument for keeping it on, because if it is in full use, then it could be you know, a major user, but, you know, so.
And if I could, you know, I've obviously not made this a secret. I introduced this bill last session. I introduced it again at the beginning of this current session. You know, if the Development Corp has proposed language changes that they'd like to submit, I'm happy to take a look at those. I'll amend it on the floor if need be. I'll drop a floor sub or just do the amendments as is. But thus far, no one submitted any language. No one said a word to me about this. You know, yesterday my phone starts ringing, anyone who's had any issues. So if there are concerns, or if SLDC wants to propose language, I'm happy to take a look at it and we can consider it. But thus far, no one submitted anything, and it's not like this is a terribly complicated bill. It's 4 pages.
So if we pass this out, what I hear you saying is that if SLDC propose an amendment, then you would consider it on the floor.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that you would actually work to
I got to see what it looks like. Thus far, no one's given me anything.
So what's the difference if we just hold this and wait for a recommendation? Will it stop the process? I mean, 6 1 and a half does none other. Could we just hold the bill until we get the proposed amendment and then move
I mean,
forward?
I would defer to the chairman. I don't know what the calendar looks like. Are we having any meetings again before when does our break start? Mid-July?
I really hope that we do, because we got a bunch of resolutions that we
Yeah.
are sitting on here, so
I
my
mean,
plan is if we need to, we will schedule a special meeting, you know, to get all this other stuff out that we.
Okay, so we do plan on meeting before we go down for the summer. I mean, we've had this sitting around here for a while. It's something I'd like to get moved and get done before break, at the very least. I mean, I'm amenable. I'll hold the bill for, you know, I'm happy. I would prefer if we just voted it out today, but if there's some unease with doing that, I'll hold it till we see this language, and then we can go forward from there.
Right. And I remember listening to the presentation, and I thought it was very educational. And I remember hearing about how in Minneapolis, I believe it was, and they used the steam to heat or cool. Some had to do with technology and computers.
Yeah,
and
you
stuff.
can
They
use
used
it. Well, you can use it also for
servers.
servers.
So I think there are a lot of opportunities that maybe we're not using right now that we can use in the future. But what's more interesting is if we do this and people get off the system, seeing by numbers the negative impact, you know, to the system, and at what point will it basically collapse? I mean, because we don't want it to collapse.
No.
So I'm listening to what Otis is saying. I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm supportive of what you're doing, but I'm also trying to be sensitive to future development, which is in your ward at the end of the day. I'm sure you would be very sensitive to future development as well, and not want to be an impediment to that. But I think that would be helpful for me in my mind to see some numbers and what this could potentially do, how, you know, devastating it can be to the system if we let it go right now, or if we have an exception. I mean.
Well, Mason, can you speak to some of that?
I mean,
he's sort of the numbers.
Can we just see, I mean, just give a report kind of, sort of, not just speaking to it, but something that we can visually see.
I'm sure they can come up with some sort of, I mean, we just had, I know a system in Youngstown, Ohio, similar to ours recently, has gone through some serious financial troubles that's put their city in a tough spot. So I guess I'm looking for clarification of what you're looking for.
I would be more concerned about St. Louis steam loop, and if,
I can address those. So our predecessor, Veolia, who we purchased
The water
the plant
people?
from. What's that?
did you say Veolia?
Veolia was the name of the company who owned the steam plant before us. We purchased it last fall. They acquired it in 2006. The time they acquired it, it had 105 customers on board. By the time we acquired it, it was down to 72. 2 more have left since we've acquired it. And they've left the system because they used tax credits to be able to install new boilers and drop off. Youngstown is a similar city like us, where they do not require the use of the steam loop. They're ahead of us. They crossed below that threshold of over a 30% loss. I told you all last time I was here that in the summer, the Public Utility Commission took over the Youngstown steam loop. And in the fall, they instituted massive rate hikes to try to save the loop. Those went into place. In February of this year, they passed new rates to not only cause winter rates to go up, but summer rates. A month ago in April, it collapsed. The loop was done. They had no capital money left to fix it. A steam pipe broke, a main. It flooded a condensing pipe. And right now in Youngstown, Ohio, the 5 largest buildings, and it's not as big a city as St. Louis, have no air conditioning. And they haven't for a month and a half. And know what happened to the owners of the Youngstown Thermal? They left. They shut down. They're not making any money. You know who has the plant now? The city and the Public Utility Commission. In St. Louis, I think 41% of the customer base is the city buildings. Since 2006, the customer base has dropped 25%, and the city steam bill has correspondingly gone up 40%. The reason that the city is asking, or Jack has asked for a 5% funding of the SWMDC's account is because during that period, SWMDC once had over $1 million to fund repairs and as an emergency fund for things like what happened in Youngstown. They're at 0 or close to 0 now. It is a catastrophe waiting to happen. Now, the cities that have mandated the use of the steam loop, not just for an incentive obligation like we're asking for here, but actually have mandated it, Vancouver, Nashville, Indianapolis, Chicago, all of those cities that we saw in the presentation earlier today, one thing they all have in common is a district energy system that is supported and mandated by the city. And the reason they are is because of the energy infrastructure it creates underneath the city. You have a choice. You can have a bunch of buildings with boilers. Those boilers get paid for by tax incentive dollars. The developer then sells the project after he develops and gets a development fee. In the meantime, the building comes off the steam loop, and now the city has to subsidize the increased rates. Or you have a centralized district energy system that most large cities are putting in and or are subsidizing. Amazon requires it for any place they go. Apple requires it for places they go. Dell, BMW, all of those are energy efficient pushing companies now. And the reason they push that is because what we can do at district energy to make things energy efficient. If you talk about cost savings, you can talk about things like peak load management. Everyone out there is running boilers. They're also paying for massive peak loads. They can't control the costs. I can control that with the district energy system because across a board. So we shave, on average, 25% during peak hours. And this is Ontario, saves 25% on electricity costs, heating costs, as per boiler-based system. We can deploy energy-efficient technology quicker. Right now, we are putting a little over $500,000. In fact, we just signed for $2 million of PACE money. We're taking $500,000 of that money and doing a really neat thing where we take the water that used to condense in our pipes because it's steam and at a certain point it cools down, becomes condensed water again. We're taking that water back out of our pipes. We are running it through a chilling tower. Then we're putting it in front of the air that goes into our electricity generator. And we're doing what's called inlet cooling. It improves our efficiency another 7%. So we're about 82% efficient once we finish our improvements. An average boiler is 61% efficient. Plus, we're generating electricity that's offsetting carbon burning electricity because we're selling it out onto the grid. You also have the space savings. You take a city where I'm from, like Lexington, Kentucky, we have a huge stormwater issue. Boilers sit on top of buildings. Buildings that have boilers on top don't have patios. They don't have green space for apartment users to go out and have a large patio deck with a pool or with a garden or with all the things you see in New York City or Nashville or Indianapolis or Chicago. All of those residential developments downtown have outdoor space in on top of their buildings.
Mason, I'm going to ask you, I think we listened to your presentation. I'm going to move back to Otis real quick to try to see if I can.
Sure, and let me address the railroad exchange, if you don't mind, quickly.
Okay.
We have met with them. In February, we did a study. We have a full-time salesperson and marketing person now. We studied their building usage, and we provided them a proposal at a rate structure that was going to be $32,000 less per year than if they put in their own boilers. They're not to the point that they can make a decision. They said they'd get back to us in August.
They're currently on the system.
The building is, but
Building is.
it's only for, I would call it for preservation steam use to make
Okay.
sure the building doesn't deteriorate.
Okay. And Otis, my follow-up question to you is, if there's a development agreement, they're getting the historic tax credits, if we carved out, if we made it mandatory that they be on the system, but we carve out what they think their savings might be, is there an additional incentive over a certain period of time, 5 or 10 years, that we can offer outside the tax abatement, or maybe a TIF, or is it significant at
I
the
don't
end
know
of the
that
day?
it would make a difference, particularly for some of, it comes down to the bottom line for those guys who have very large historic buildings, just because of what Alderman Coder indicated, is that they are able to then put that into their equation when they're.
So how much would a typical boiler for, the railway exchange cost?
I don't know.
I mean, is 100,000, 200,000,
That's probably a lot more than that. A lot more than that.
$1 million?
You know, the historic tax credit allocation on that building's like, it's the whole cap. I mean, it's
Yeah,
$200 something million in historic tax credits.
Right, but I'm just focusing on the boiler. If we took the boiler out of their allotment as far as tax credits. So
I couldn't speak to what percentage of a redevelopment cost your heating systems would be. I don't know.
Because I'm just thinking, is it significant? Is it 1% of the budget? Is it 5% is it a deal breaker?
Mason, do you have a sense?
It would depend on the budget size, because some buildings require more to fix the rest of the envelope than others. For example, the Missouri Athletic Club, because we work with them pretty closely, you have to do 2 boilers, right? You have to do a redundant system, because if one breaks, you got to have another source. Their boiler cost is for both, is about 400 to 450 installed, just the equipment. So when you get to railway exchange, you're going to be closer to probably $1 million in total cost.
That's just the boiler itself?
That's the boiler system.
Not the ductwork or whatever, the distribution system? It's
Which they would have anyway, and which they can use historic tax credits for,
Right.
even under our bill.
Right,
It's just the boiler piece itself.
okay. So in some cases, it will be insignificant, and in some cases, potentially, and probably a few, I'm guessing, because you said most of the buildings that are historic are pretty much done downtown. So is there really a real issue here? I've circled myself back around.
Those buildings.
If I could.
So, and that's sort of the trade-off. It's like, look, this isn't going to make, everybody particularly happy, but you know what? Fine, then don't use city incentives. Don't use tax abatement, don't get a TIF. This is one of the trade-offs.
I want it
All right,
mandatory.
let's try to, we are been down here all day.
I want it mandatory. I don't know about what anybody else is talking about.
All right. Any other comments? Okay, we're going to hold this, and we really want to have something worked out compromise-wise, Otis, we need to, let's try to get this done. Let's try to get a compromise of some sort on this so that we can, this is important that we get this out of here, I think, so.
It is, but I think by the time that you come back and you're going to vote on all of them anyways.
Okay.
We will have.
Something worked out. What I want is, look,
this, again, as I said, this has not been a secret. I want to put people's feet to the fire, or to the boiler, I guess we could say. I want to get this thing passed, you know, before we go down for summer break.
And I agree that I will work with them.
All right.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Having no other business before us, the chair will entertain a motion that we adjourn.
We adjourn.
Hearing no objection, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.